Yeah.
Well, give me, now we're ready. Yeah, I'm ready. It's up.
Yeah, oh, maybe I'll just get is this over? I'll just get this.
This is-
Class. This is my class there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Is working. Okay.
So thank you very much. We are here for the second session of our mathematical Sunusia, and we decided to give 30 minutes for every contribution in order that we have also space and time for discussion. And so I'm very pleased to introduce Bruce MacLennan, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, from the monad and the dyad to the world soul and the world. Please, thank you very much.
Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good, thank you. For the past several years, I've been investigating whether certain contemporary developments in formal logic and abstract object theory can help us to understand the numbers in the Platonic forms. And I should thank Lorenzo for laying out very nicely what the characteristics of abstract objects are. And I like his term, abstract entity, but I won't try and change my terminology mid-speech. In particular, I am exploring Edward Zalta's hyperintentional modal logic as applied to abstract object theory. Among the abstract objects are numbers and other mathematical objects, but also, Zalta argues, the Platonic forms. These abstract objects exist in a robust but non-physical sense, and I treat this logic as an instrument that allows us to explore the noeta, or intelligibles, as constituents of the hypostatic nous. I must stress, however, that these are the most fundamental Platonic forms, and you might even consider them Pythagorean forms, not those higher level archetypal forms inherent to the human psyche, such as truth, beauty, justice, and the divine, which transcend logical definition and are best approached non-reductively through theurgy and depth psychology. In this paper, I will show how Zalta's logic and abstract object theory enables a coherent account extending from the monad and indefinite dyad to the physical world. First, I have to say a little about Zalta's logical instrument. It is a modal logic, which means that it deals with necessity and contingency and with possibility and impossibility. It is a hyperintentional logic, which implies that it deals with the meaning of ideas in a very fine-grained way. To accomplish this, it distinguishes two ways a subject can be related to a predicate. First, a subject can exemplify a predicate, which means that the subject is one of the individuals exhibiting that predicate. This is the familiar extensional notion of predication. Thus, Socrates exemplifies being snub-nosed. But the logic also expresses another intentional sense of predication, by which a subject can comprehend a property. For example, a triangle comprehends the property of being three-sided. That is, the property is essential to the meaning of the subject, and as we'll see, the identity of abstract objects consists entirely in the properties it comprehends. These two modes of predication turn out to correspond to the two senses of participation in a form that we find in Plato. The principal existence axiom of abstract object theory states that for any combination of properties, there is an abstract object comprehending just those properties. This is because, according to the theory, an abstract object is nothing else but a certain complex of properties. Moreover, just as an abstract object's identity consists in the properties it comprehends, so a property's identity consists in the abstract objects that comprehend it. Therefore, abstract objects and properties mutually determine each other. By investigating abstract objects, we are merely following out the necessary logical consequences of particular constellations of properties. Nevertheless, the universe of abstract objects is vast and rich, and in particular, it includes all mathematical objects. It is tempting to think of abstract objects as fictions created by stipulation of arbitrary congeries of properties. However, I think it makes more sense to think of abstract objects as eternally existing in a Platonic sense. For the truths we discover about abstract objects are eternal, public, and non-trivial. Therefore, Platonic realism as a philosophy of mathematics is a special case of Platonic realism in abstract object theory. We can think of the abstract universe as an infinite eternal network of interrelated abstract objects and properties, which includes mathematical objects and Platonic forms, that is, the noeta or intelligibles, and this network constitutes the content of the hypostatic nous. In his commentary on Metaphysics 13 and 14, Syrianus states, quote, "Number cannot come to be otherwise than from a monad and the indefinite dyad," unquote. And Theophrastus tells us that Plato and the Pythagoreans set up a kind of antithesis of the indefinite dyad and the one. In the former resides the unlimited, the disorderly, and so to speak, all kinds of formlessness. Yet the nature of the whole would not be possible without it, unquote. Indeed, these two principles are the origin not just of the numbers, but also of the forms, according to Syrianus. And these two principles operate at all levels, even down into the material world. Therefore, the indeterminate dyad is first the origin of multiplicity and unlimited generation in the physical world, but also in the intelligible realm. It is the potential for multiple instances of otherwise identical things. Therefore, is there a sense, as our ancient sources suggest, in which the monad and the indeterminate dyad are prior to nous, and even constitutive of the nous, as its deep structure? I think that there is, and one goal of this project has been to prove that the entire nous can be reduced to monads and dyads, images of the original monad and dyad. To this end, abstract objects and properties are naturally monads, for they are indivisible and featureless when considered apart from relations of comprehension or exemplification, which are then established by the dyads. As Syrianus says, the dyad is the foundation of multiplicity, for the essence of a dyad is two monads, which are numerically distinct instances of the original monad. The dyad is indeterminate until it connects two monads, which become its termini, and thus determinate. The mere distinction of two monads is accomplished by an undirected dyad, which does not differentiate between its termini. But the nous requires a directed dyad that can differentiate abstract objects and their properties, the fundamental relation of participation. Therefore, we can hypothesize that the indeterminate dyad is in fact the original directed dyad, and that each particular dyad is determined by the monads it connects. If the directed dyad is the relationship that holds between an abstract object and the properties it comprehends, and which mutually determine each other's identities, then the monads are differentiated by their positions in the network of dyads. So this is just a diagram illustrating some numbers and some of their properties. The labels are for our convenience, I have to stress. The identities of abstract objects and properties are determined by the patterns of comprehension. In other words, the places within that network. You could take all of the figures out if we had the complete network and know where one is and where two is, or where any other object is. So much for comprehension. Now we have to consider exemplification. How can it be reduced to monads and dyads? We have seen that a directed dyad from an object to a property constitutes that object's comprehension of that property. So some other arrangement of monads and dyads must constitute an object's exemplification of a property. For comprehension and exemplification are not the same. One possibility is for an object's exemplification of a property to be a cycle of dyads, for such a structure cannot be comprehension, since comprehension is hierarchical and never circular. Therefore, I hypothesize that a circular triad constitutes an object's exemplification of a property. The triad's three monads have different roles distinguished by the directed dyads that connect them. One role is the exemplifying object, marked alpha in the diagram on the left. The next is the property exemplified, pi, and the third is a sort of root, omega, whose function I will explain shortly. According to abstract object theory, in addition to properties or one-place predicates, there are also relations or multi-place predicates that can be exemplified or comprehended by appropriate numbers of objects. How are they reduced to monads and dyads? Since a cycle of three monads constitutes an object exemplifying a property or one-place predicate, I hypothesize that a cycle of four monads constitutes the exemplification of a two-place relation by two objects. The dyads distinguish the roles, the two arguments, the relation, and the root. Similarly, the exemplification of an n-place relation consists of a cycle of n plus 2 monads, and that's illustrated in the diagram on the right. Finally, I need to mention partial exemplification of relations, which is necessary for understanding the comprehension of relations. I hypothesize that partial exemplifications consist of the same cycles of monads and dyads as complete exemplifications, except that some of the argument positions are unoccupied. See the paper for details. I hope I have made a plausible case that the contents of the hypostatic nous, understood as the pleroma of abstract objects, can in fact be explained in terms of an ontologically prior monad and indefinite dyad. But now I will shift from what is prior to the nous to what is posterior to it. That is, how this abstract universe can cause and govern the material universe. Since the abstract universe, as defined by abstract object theory, contains all mathematical objects, all Platonic forms, all mathematical theories, it also includes any eventual scientific theory of everything, so long as it is mathematical or otherwise formal. But we need to consider how fundamental forms and other abstract objects relate to our material universe, or in other words, how these abstract objects govern what happens in the natural world. Among the abstract objects whose existence is proved by abstract object theory are propositions and mathematical theories. A theory is an abstract object that comprehends all and only the propositions true in that mathematical theory. As a system of propositions, a theory object is a deductively complete and independent abstract world, a domain of mutually consistent truths. And since the theories are self-contained universes, they can be incompatible with each other. The existence axiom for abstract objects guarantees that all theory objects exist so long as they comprehend a deductively closed set of propositions. Moreover, although theories can be incompatible with each other, all the objects that exist within them exist simultaneously as abstract objects. This is because these abstract objects comprehend just the properties that the propositions of the theory assert that they exemplify in their home theory. The universe of abstract objects is thus a sort of multiverse containing the abstract objects described by all possible theories. It is worth noting that the propositions are intentional, with a T, intentional objects, that is, the sort of things that can be the objects of belief, doubt, hypothesis, etc. Theories, which are systems of logically interrelated propositions, are also intentional objects. They are, in fact, the appropriate sort of thing to occupy the hypostatic nous qua mind, in which each theory is effectively an independent eternal nous. If we take seriously the idea that the hypostatic nous is a sort of mind, then we must understand it as an eternal grasping of all of the propositions comprehended by all mathematical theories. For many years, physicists have been striving to discover a comprehensive mathematical theory of the physical universe, a so-called theory of everything. They have not succeeded to date, but whatever theory they eventually discover, so long as it's a mathematical theory, it will be among the abstract objects whose existence is guaranteed by abstract object theory. But this raises the question, why does our universe obey this particular theory of everything and not some other? For we know that the abstract multiverse contains all possible mathematical theories. Or more fundamentally, why does our material universe obey any mathematical laws? Or is this simply a brute empirical fact with no deeper explanation? Moreover, whatever properties and relations characterize the most fundamental physical substances, we know there are abstract objects comprehending precisely those properties and relations. That's given by the existence axiom. All that distinguishes the abstract stuff from the physically existing stuff is that we imagine the latter to be instantiated in some prime matter, which must be featureless when considered apart from the properties and relations that characterize it, and which it shares with its abstract doppelganger. This prima materia, as unconstrained potentiality, seems to be nothing else than an ineffable polar opposite to the ineffable one. Whether it's a vacuous chora, or protehule, or Anaximander's aperon, in Plotinus's words, it is formless, other, infinite, impotent, an image and phantom of mass, and not even existent. Moreover, prime matter seems to fulfill no explanatory function except to distinguish the forms that are physically instantiated from those that aren't. This is especially the case in modern physics, in which the fundamental particles are just excitations in a small number of interdependent quantum fields, which are just quantity extended in abstract space and time. One conclusion we might reach is that the rational rational inexplicability of prime matter is precisely its significance. Prime matter is what we call the part of the world that is beyond the reach of intellect. It is the inherently unintelligible or irrational residuum of reality. Thus, the physical existence of prime matter reveals the limits of mathematical physics, for any mathematical theory of prime matter would imply the existence of abstract matter comprehending the very same properties. We cannot even say matter is characterized by having no properties because there is an abstract object comprehending no properties. Rather, prime matter cannot be defined in terms of its properties at all. Arguably, the logical irreducibility of prime matter is the true significance of the indefinite dyad, but I would like to explore an alternative resolution to this problem. Several physicists have suggested a bold new approach to the relation of material reality and physical law. In 1989, John Archibald Wheeler proposed the it from bit hypothesis, which is based on the observation that all we know about physical reality are measurements, which are ultimately answers to yes or no questions. That is, nothing is accomplished by hypothesizing a physical reality or it separate from these bits of information. He explains, quote, "It from bit symbolizes the idea that every item of the physical world has at bottom, at a very deep bottom in most instances, an immaterial source and explanation. That what we call reality arises in the last analysis from the posing of yes-no questions and the registering of equipment-evoked responses. In short, that all things physical are information theoretic in origin, and this is a participatory universe," unquote. Already in the 1950s, the physicist Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker argued that reality could be reduced to elementary or alternatives, which are fundamental units of abstract quantum information, quantum bits. More recently, another physicist, Max Tegmark, has defended the related mathematical universe hypothesis, which is that, quote, our external physical reality is a mathematical structure, unquote. This idea has ancient precedents. For example, Aristotle once claimed that the Pythagoreans, quote, consider number to be a first principle, both as the material of things and as constituting their properties and states, unquote. How might this work from the perspective of abstract object theory? A mathematical theory of everything must describe how physical things change in time, and so it's necessary to say a few words about how time can exist in the eternal abstract multiverse. For example, a mathematical theory might axiomatize time in a tense logic in order to relativize propositions to time. Such an axiomatization defines a temporal frame, which comprises a set of moments and a temporal relation that defines which moments can follow other moments. According to abstract object theory, such mathematical theories exist, and therefore the temporal frames that they define also exist as abstract objects. Now, in abstract object theory, a moment of time is an abstract object that comprehends all the propositions that are true at that time. Therefore, a moment of time is the state of a world at that time, and the mathematical laws of a physical theory define the temporal relation among moments, and therefore the possible sequences of world states or world histories. Both world states and world histories exist because, of course, both world states and world histories exist, of course, as eternal abstract objects in the abstract multiverse. If the abstract multiverse is the content of the hypostatic nous, including the eternal laws of the universe, then perhaps a world history, which expands these laws in time as a natural world, corresponds to a world soul. I hope I've made plausible how, given the mathematical universe hypothesis, an abstract theory might manifest in abstract time as a physical world. If physicists succeed in discovering some final theory of everything, it will probably be formulated at the level of fundamental particles and fields, or perhaps in terms of things even further removed from our experience, such as superstrings. But whatever it says about our world, if it is the final theory, then it will say all that can be said and account for everything that can happen in our universe. This final theory of everything will define abstract moments of time, which are world states comprehending all the propositions true at that time. We should not be surprised if this final theory of everything embodies a concept of time that is alien to our experience, as is already the case in the special and general relativity theories and in quantum field theory. Thus, the final theory of everything might define a space-time continuum of moments, each an abstract object comprehending all physical facts true at that location in space-time. Be that as it may, the mathematical universe hypothesis tells us that these abstract moments constitute physical reality, and that their relations in abstract space-time are their real evolution in time. How might abstract object theory and the mathematical universe hypothesis explain our human minds? For the mathematical universe hypothesis to apply in the intentional domain, we need a mathematical theory of intentional predicates that is so comprehensive and accurate that it exhausts the phenomena, leaving nothing to be explained. And it is also reducible to our final physical theory of everything. This is extremely unlikely at the level of our minds, but might be possible at a microscopic level, perhaps at the level of individual neurons, of which there are 86 billion in our brains, or at even a lower level. Such a theory would deal with abstract objects that comprehend physical properties, but also comprehend very simple intentional relations that are nevertheless genuinely intentional, perhaps as some kind of dual aspect monism. These fundamental intentional relations might be elementary differences that make a difference, as David Chalmers describes them. that is, bits of genuine information or elementary experience, proto-phenomena that in massive numbers combine to constitute the qualia of our conscious experience. According to the mathematical universe hypothesis, such objects are real and have real intentional states. Having identified them, we would then strive to reduce higher level theories of mind to the theory of these elementary instances of genuine intentionality. But we would have to expect macroscopic mental states to be only approximately describable in these terms, which is generally the case for macroscopic existence. I have argued that systematic application of the mathematical universe hypothesis implies that a final theory of everything would be sufficient to constitute the physical existence of our universe, including sentient beings such as us. Specifically, such a theory would define abstract world histories or sequences of world states which are physically real. But if the theory defines multiple world histories, each real according to the mathematical universe hypothesis, we might ask, which of these is the actual world history, the one in which we're living and experiencing our lives? What distinguishes our world from other possible worlds? The simplest assumption under the mathematical universe hypothesis might be that every world history is a real world extended in time, since there is no reason to suppose that another world history's mathematical forms are any less physically real than ours. Those other world histories might have sentient beings, perhaps even some similar to you or me, if their world histories diverged from ours only recently. Here we have different independent worlds realizing the same final theory of everything. But this raises a more surprising possibility. What about different theories of everything? It would seem there could be many mathematical theories, each realizing a world as complex as ours, but with different physical constants, or even different physical laws. Must we assume that all these worlds and their extensions into world histories physically exist? This is an implication of the mathematical universe hypothesis. So by taking abstract object theory and the mathematical universe hypothesis seriously and following their implications to the end, we reach a surprising conclusion, but I do not think it's a reductio ad absurdum. This conclusion is that many abstract mathematical theories will be physically real within the theory's abstract extension as an abstract temporal structure, and will be experienced as real if those theories lead to the existence of sentient beings within them. In other words, our experience in this physical universe is precisely what it is like to be part of the world history of a particular abstract mathematical theory. As Tegmark says, quote, mathematical existence and physical existence are equivalent, so that all structures that exist mathematically exist physically as well, unquote. That is, any sufficiently complex mathematical theory will constitute a physically real universe, which will be experienced as real by any sentient beings that happen to exist within it. This has been a long journey from the monad and indefinite dyad to a strange and perhaps incredible destination. But I hope I have convinced you that it is at least a coherent and comprehensive explanation of how forms and other abstract objects, such as numbers, can be the causes and governors of our world. There are, of course, echoes here of earlier philosophers, such as Whitehead, Berkeley, and even Anaxagoras. There are also contemporary relatives, such as Bernardo Kastrup's analytical idealism, as well as Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis and its siblings. But I believe Zalta's abstract object theory gives a much more precise understanding of the hypostatic nous and how it emanates our cosmos while confirming ancient Pythagorean insights. Thank you. So my other pictures. There's the numbers.
Bruce, for having respected our time. And now I'm warmly enthusiastic of introducing the person who is together with Robert Birchman, the arche of these mathematical dialogues. Svetla, you have the word. Thank you. Speaker.
Thank you, Salvatore. Luca, I have a handout. If you could project it, and it's uploaded there. All right. Earlier this morning, I promised you that I will kind of tell you how we got so far along our Mathematica journey. And my topic is really part of this journey. I think it will present a nice continuity between where we stopped. And we're going back and forth between modernity and ancient time. And what is the bridge between modernity and ancient time without late antiquity, without Plotinus, and then Proclus following after me? So the topic of my presentation today is really a result of our group research. And I will kind of start with a modern, most recent causal explanation of our purple Aristotelian theory of causes. I will jump into Plotinus and I'll tell you why and why it is useful, what we can learn from it, and how many more questions we need to answer. And then I will zoom out back to modern times. So our first research topic was mapping mathematical and cognitive epistemologies. We met in Rome. We discovered that this was just the beginning. The mapping is easy, but explaining and coming up with a definition of number was a challenge. Year 2, we come around and we provided ourselves a practicing mathematician to help us come up with the kind of fill in the gap of a precise definition of what number is. And we were strong and brave. It takes intellectual bravery and curiosity. And then we realized that we cannot really define number without knowing what number properties are, which brings us back to Vienne and last year's presentation, in which once we talked about properties, then the light bulb went on, and well, how about number and causality? Because ultimately, as Bruce very well showed in his presentation today, well, what comes first? Numbers, abstract objects, world, soul, or the physical universe? So here is where I come in. Why causal profile of number, and why in Plotinus, and why a modern perspective? Well, we need both a causal profile and a model perspective, because Plotinus's understanding of number is really an outlier, with the exception of those few of us who would like to take it more and more seriously. It is an outlier because Plotinus, very intellectually bravely, is trying to superimpose numbers above substance and ontology. And this was a move that his great successors actually did not feel comfortable. So they quickly demoted number from being right under the one, from actually coming even below the intelligible realm. And this is a long, long problem that goes all the way back to Aristotle and his attitude towards Plato's misunderstanding of equating, and that is Aristotle's interpretation of it as the forms being causes. So I have been actually putting this topic on the side for quite some time because I didn't really feel prepared to have the modern philosophical perspective with which I can understand Plotinus's understanding of number. But here it is. Serendipity works in mysterious ways. A colleague of mine, and Luca, could we move up to the next part? What is causal profile? A colleague of mine in the philosophy department at my university actually published in 2023 Causality and Causal Explanation in Aristotle. Actually, Lorenzo and Robert both divided causality and causal explanation, but Nat Stein actually used them as two methodological mechanisms of understanding causality. And Nat Stein's main point is a main point which I think it's about time that we move on, that causality is linear. Specifically starting with the purple position of Aristotle and his treatment of substance. This is immaterial substance, and this is the first passage on the handout, that is substance that is separated from sense-perceptible objects. Well, Aristotle places that understanding of substance as both the arche and aitia. Notice he does not equate them, but presents two alternative options. And we will see how cleverly Plotinus engages with that duality of both first principles working as causes and vice versa. And he has something quite important fundamental to say about this. The second purple passage from Aristotle on the handout is that ultimately, in addition to identifying what something is and what causes something, in fact, actually, we are trying to grasp the substance of what something is. And yet substances both are entities and also have properties and activities. He separates physical from metaphysical or immaterial substances. And specifically, as in the last two lines, he is trying to grasp the tension between efficient cause and final cause. So, Nat Stein's clever solution to that linear presentation of the four causes in Aristotle, and specifically the dominant influence of efficient and final cause, is in the summation of the definition of what he calls a causal profile. So we're not talking about theory of four causes, we're not talking about formal, material, efficient, and final cause in that linear progression, but we are talking about a cluster of causes. And some of them are more dominant than the others, depending on the object of causality that we are investigating. Again, I think Bruce did a wonderful job showing the complexity of this. So this is Nat Stein's definition. Aristotle distinguishes at least between two types of what I will call causal profile, which I will label origin dominant. And under origin dominant, here think about efficient, emphasis, causal profile with emphasis on efficiency, that is the event profile that Robert mentioned earlier today, and dominant. Under and, here we should understand final, where in the causal profile of something, then the final goal is the dominant cause in it. So a causal profile is a distinctive structure. Make this as a key point. We'll come back to it. We'll see what Plotinus does with this. And that distinctive structure is characterized by a subclass of causal definitions. Again, make a point about that subclassifications that Nat Stein's introduction kind of intimates. So, and he gives, to kind of materialize that abstract conception, he gives two examples. For example, for origin dominant causation, he says, he actually calls, imagine there is a bird, your favorite pet bird, and you keep feeding it nonstop every day until that bird becomes big and gluttonous bird. And then this is a good example that ultimately the luxurious life and the overfeeding of the bird becomes really, it is origin dominant causation. The bird becomes quite relaxed and fattened up because we've been feeding it all the time. Another example is the migratory birds. Before they make, or let's take actually, you know, any form of migratory animals, before they make their major migration, they really build up on their resources. They eat, they fatten up as well, just as the gluttonous bird in the cage. However, why are they doing this? They're not doing it because there is someone that is forcing them from outside, but they're doing it from the inside, right? That is a end dominant causation. They're doing it because at the end of the day, they need to fly across the ocean, they need to fly across the Gulf and to make their migratory route. So apparently causation is, although it has the same effect, it has completely different meaning. And going back to Francesco's opening talk today, causation needs data points and parametrization. And those parametrization depend on the specific object. So, Luca, let's move on to part 3. We started with Aristotle, and because Nat Stein's point is really, he begins with Aristotle and he ends with Aristotle, then I will use Aristotle's treatment of the 3 theoretical disciplines and their attitude towards causation as the linking point or my gate into Plotinus. So, Nat Stein's analysis really focuses on the relationship of causation between mathematics and natural philosophy. That is Aristotle's understanding of natural philosophy. The two go hand in hand, and both of them are very familiar to us. Aristotle, although relatively, but he does subordinate natural philosophy to mathematics, but in passage 1, very familiar to us, now, Luca, can we move to part 3? Causes are eternal, but not all causes are equal. Thank you. Yeah. All right. So here we have Aristotle's purple definition of the 3 theoretical sciences, natural philosophy, sandwiched between mathematics and theology. His main point is that all causes are eternal, but not all causes are equal. Right, in their eternity, a point that, again, came very well in Robert's presentation. Aristotle distinguishes a hierarchy of causes, or I will even call it hierarchy of causal profiles, depending on the science and the discipline. Natural philosophy at the bottom, mathematics, intermediary, moving towards theology. And the causation in theology at the bottom of the passage, Aristotle equates with the study of being qua being. Now, Aristotle focuses on natural philosophy specifically and causation in natural philosophy, and the second book of the physics in the second book of the physics, he really switches from immaterial substances and causation to physical substances and causation. And here I think there is a kind of a opening passage, crucial passage that we need to take into account to understand where Plotinus comes in this story and why he remained an outlier in the Neoplatonic tradition, but actually he's quite modern than we think he is. His big question is, what is the difference between the mathematician and the natural philosopher in the way they treat causation and they study objects, right? Both disciplines study physical objects. However, they study them from a different perspective, right? So while physics studies mathematics or studies objects as a point of limits and containing material substance. Mathematics is very well, it came in all of our presentations today, all right, are abstract. They abstract reality and make it really a tool for both epistemological, analogical, and intellectual modeling of getting us closer and making the intelligible realm more accessible than otherwise it is through the sense perceptible reality. But while Aristotle is really focusing on the different objects and distinguishes the difference between natural philosophy and mathematics, the main point that he actually denies, and I think it's really crucial for us to, here comes Plotinus, is the fact that Aristotle denies motion in mathematical causation, right? Hold on, file this in the back of your mind. Proclus, actually, Álvaro Proclus in the voice of Álvaro is coming up to explain more exactly how that transition happens. But Aristotle takes motion out of the equation, and that opens the door to Plotinus. But Aristotle, actually, in the passage, I don't see, it hasn't, okay, just stop there. Yeah, look, stop there. You see the Lontanusi. There is a passage which it should have been in gray. Aristotle, while he's discussing the difference in causality between mathematics and natural philosophy, he brings in the Platonists. There are those, he says, there are those who actually think that also the ideas are possible to be separated from physical objects, and they make the mistake of attributing properties of motion to them. At the end of the day, Aristotle's point, so this is kind of a jibe at the causal relation between forms and numbers, separating mathematics from Platonism. Well, Plotinus comes in and says, not so, Aristotle. Let's go back to that exclusion of motion from the equation. Look how we're moving down to the causal profile of number in Plotinus, to the bottom of the page. That's perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So we have to take one major difference, kind of a foundational point in Plotinus's understanding of number. All the talks that we heard today, including actually Lorenz's treatment of forms as abstract object, really is devoting his grounding mathematics in the sensible reality and studying physical reality and its principles. Not so for Plotinus. In the first passage, which actually comes from a rather later treatise, he finally is able to synthesize his main position, that the mathematical sciences are twofolded. Each one of them has a lower part, and that is the mathematics, the numbers, the geometry, the astronomy, the music that we think of. Well, that part studies the physical, the entauto, the realm down here, the sensible reality. The other part, and each of the sciences have its own counterpart that looks up the higher side of the mathematical sciences, studies the intelligible reality, right? And here I'm giving you but this is not like Plotinus's final thought. It is something that he has worked all along throughout the Aeneids of getting to that conclusion. In one of the first treatises, number 5, in the chronology, actually in his Scala Scientiarum, the order of the different art and sciences, Plotinus mentions the art of intelligible number. That's all within the whole scale. What is this? We have to fast forward throughout the entirety of his metaphysics to say, haha, that's what he's dealing. He's dealing about that twofold division. And he also makes the same reference about geometry as well. So moving on to actually staying into another of the earlier treatises, which Porphyry places the last in the Aeneid 6.9 on the good, which kind of gives not only the causal profile of the one as the first hypostasis, but also the causal, the whole ontological or hyper-ontological profile of the one. There, Plotinus, when it comes to the one, Plotinus's what a formula is that the cause first cannot be identical with its effect, right? Thinking, noises, all right, is not, intellection itself could be the cause of thinking, but intellection itself is not thinking. And most importantly, as far as it comes to the first principle or the one in his hierarchy, his main point is that the cause of everything is none of these things. It cannot be, the cause of everything must be epikeina, right? Aitias. All right. So this is a very, very early position, which he defends again throughout his metaphysics, fast forwarding to one of the main outlier treatises in the Enneads, and that is his treatment of number in Ennead 6.6. The treatise is 34 in the chronological sequence, so places it right behind and after. So you have to stay tuned for the second act of my presentation coming up in Luciano's panel on Neoplatonism and the Gnostics. But all I will say is that most people don't know what to do with Plotinus's treatise on numbers. And there's many, many good reasons for this. His main treatment there is, his main argument is that numbers do not pertain to, they're just numbers, quantitative numbers or images of the true numbers. And 6.6 is an explanation how the true numbers constitute the intelligible realm and what is their relationship with the one. So his main issue right here is that he has to explain what the origin of number is. In a way, Bruce's presentation actually addressed the formulaic principle from the New Pythagoreans onwards, that the numbers really are products of the relationship between the monad and the dyad. Plotinus, this is the passage at the bottom of the previous page, but it's very, yes, thank you, very well-known passage. But notice there, Plotinus is identifying the one as the cause of existence and being, identifying the one many nature of the intellect. And the next thing that he says is that the one produces number, that places number in that position that Robert was trying to really corner it, that is, whether it is a cause or ratio. For Plotinus, it is both, and we will see how and why. Moving on to the third page. So his main question then, since he placed the origin of number directly as produced by the one, the natural question is to ask whether substance, that is intelligible substance, generates number, right? Or number itself divides intelligible substance. There is a long argument, no time for this. I'm aware of our time limits, so you're welcome to talk to me after the talk, but I will fast kind of a forward to Plotinus's definition of number. His final answer is that number divides substance, and that division happens specifically as the function he calls number both dynamis, a power, and energeia, actuality of substance. And he identifies 4 particular aspects, which for the sake in the table, Luca, can we center the table? For the sake of clarity, I'm identifying in the table as activity. Those 4 aspects are highlighted in the passage above. He identifies or defines actually the capital B being as number which has been unified. The beings, the capital B beings, and the content, what actually Bruce referred to as the abstract objects, but that's not what Plotinus is talking about. He's talking about substantial beings. He defines them as a number which has been unfolded. Then we have intellect, which he identifies as number moving in itself. Who is he talking to here? Clearly. What is his solution? Clearly. This is Plotinus's take on completing Aristotle's project and also complicating it, but not confusing it, Francesco, right? He is infusing without confusing. And finally, he defines the final product, the final completed structure of the intelligible, that is the complete living being, very well known to us from the Timaeus, as number which is encompassing. So for many years, I just stopped here, and I call this, Luca, can we forward and center the two? Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's look at the image on the, what is it, the left-hand side. For many years, I just lived with this image, thinking that this is, all right, this is good enough presentation of those four activities. See that they're not, first, they're non-linear, right? Second, we divide them, and Plotinus is quite specific. We divide those in logo, that is in our mind, in theory. This is the best that we can do. And yet, because their relationship is presented, really this is the self-contained structure of nous, going back to the monads and dyads, but that's beyond the monads and dyads. So finally, thanks to actually everyone in our research group, I was able to try to model Plotinus's understanding using Nat Stein's causal profile. I tried to model the relationship between the four primary entities and activities of number, constructing the intelligible, to come up with a causal profile of number in Plotinus. Well, first, going back to Nat Stein's definition, do we have a distinctive structure? Yes, we do. Do we have subspecies of specific distinctive elements? Yes, we do. Do they function together? Yes, they do. We cannot take one without the other. Really, they are they're simultaneously and the same time. The most important part is this is a non-linear presentation of Plotinus's understanding, not really of number specifically, of nous and the intelligible. And we're getting as close as possible to break out from that linearity. So at the end of the day, in a kind of search of a middle ground between my colleagues' new theory of causal profile and Plotinus's own late ancient understanding, then Luca, can we go more to the last part, and I'm finishing. Then again, in the footsteps of my colleague, I looked more closely at the theory of neo-mechanism, which was proposed by actually two biologists and a philosopher, Machammer and Arden, and Craver is the philosopher in this intellectual triad. So let's read, and that will be my conclusion. Let's read their definition of what neo-mechanism is. Mechanisms are entities and activities, again, think of that spherical image that I presented to us, organized such that they are produced of regular changes from start or setup to finish. Mechanisms are composed of both entities with their properties and activities. Activities are the producers of change. Entities are the things that engage in activities. Activities usually require that entities have specific type of properties. The organization of these entities and activities determines the ways in which they produce. And here I have purposefully scratched out the phenomena, right? Because we are really taking this a level above. What we'll do, we'll strip off the sense perceptible references to time, place, location in order to get as close as possible to Plotinus's model. So no phenomena, replace it with intelligible, the structure of the intelligible. Entities often must be appropriately located, stretch this out, but keep structured and oriented. Intentionality, we're keeping this, and activities in which they engage must have a temporal order, rate, and duration, and we are taking this out as well. Mechanisms are regular in that they work always when it comes to Plotinus's understanding of both the intelligible and the structure of the intelligible by number. There is no relativity in it. It's always period, so we are taking the relative reference there. And at the end of the day, mechanisms regularly actually depend on productive continuity between the stages. We don't have stages. The four aspects of number coexist. They work simultaneously, and they are they're simply epekena discursivity. So where am I at the end of the day? By doing this exercise of filtering Plotinus's understanding of number, both through the causal profile, the new causal profile understanding of Aristotle, causation, and also the already pre-existing theory of neo-mechanism in modern biology, I learned that broadly, preliminary conclusion is that, well, Plotinus's understanding of number kind of shows the typical Wittgensteinian type of family resemblance. Number is not a mechanism. On one hand, in Plotinus, number is organic system, self-contained. It thinks itself, but we don't have time to talk about this. But number is both is it origin dominant or end dominant? Is it efficient cause, intellect, the self-thinking? Is this the dominant causation in the profile? Or the final goal, ultimately, the complete living, everything is done for the sake of the good of the complete living being. Well, it is, I would say, actually, it is all dominant profile, where all the causes work mutually, reciprocally together in constructing what otherwise is impossible to construct. So the causal profile of number, right, raises naturally more questions than answers. We're moving on to the last part, Mathematica 5, what is next? I think today, from a number of angles, we've shown that the linearity of Euclidean geometry has been very helpful to par, but only to a point. And it is time for even our linear understanding of causality is insufficient. So my challenge to all of my teammates is really, can we go beyond linearity to understand intelligible reality? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Svetla. And we are perfectly on time to Triton now, Álvaro Bohm, The Dreams of Quantity, Priscian's Philosophy of Mathematics and the 16th Century Reception. Prego.
So thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm clearly aware that I'm standing between you and the coffee break. So I will try to do things as easy as possible. And I should say that I'm very honored to be in this panel, but I think that the organizers wanted to have a really Platonic end, because I'm here to defend that there is no such a thing as mathematical causation, which I suppose is the most operatic answer we can provide in the end. So I will deal today with a piece of the history of philosophy, both of late ancient philosophy and Renaissance philosophy. And there is a small change in my title, as you can read in the paper. Now it is called The Dreams of Quantity, Priscian's Philosophy of Mathematics, and its 15th and 16th century reception. This is so because as part of my research, I wanted to explore how this, for the history of mathematics and for the history of philosophy of mathematics, quite important text was received in the Renaissance. And therefore, the first part of my talk will be related to the reception and not just to the philosophy of mathematics. In other words, I want to answer the first question you have there. How is that Priscianus's commentary in the Anima became an authority in the 15th and 16th centuries. Why is that so? Because in the mid 16th century, we have this quite interesting fact, which is that Priscian is the main authority in commenting Aristotle at the University of Padua. It's not Averroes anymore, it's not Alexander anymore, it is Priscian. Now, first things first, we have here a doxographical or historiographical confusion, because this commentary was traditionally ascribed to Simplicius. Therefore, it's quite tricky, because if you read Renaissance authors, you will find that they refer to many of the theories of the soul, which are contained within this text, within this commentary, as the theories of Simplicius. Now we know, we are more or less certain that this text is not of Simplicius, and many of the contents, theory of knowledge, theory of intellect, and also the philosophy of mathematics, which is contained in it, seems to share a great affinity with the other texts we have of Priscian, such as his paraphrase, which is factually a commentary on Theophrastus's De Sensu. Now, why 15th century? Because as far as we know, and I will argue that this is the main reason, or one of the main reasons, why this commentary became so famous, the first Latin speaker and Latin philosopher, so to speak, which made public use and wrote about this text was the Count of Concord, Pico della Mirandola. And therefore, I need to address now what and how and why Pico della Mirandola read this text. Now, in his conclusion of the year 1486, we have a section which is called, is a text one in your handout. It is called Conclusiones secundum simplicium numero novum. Of course, he believes that this person, the author of this text, is Simplicius. By the way, this was already discussed during the Renaissance. Francesco Piccolomini, not Alessandro Piccolomini. Francesco Piccolomini, who was a contemporary of Jacopo Zabarella, sustained publicly that Priscian was the author, and factually he held a debate with Zabarella regarding the authority of this text, of these three books. So now, if you check the conclusions as you have in your handout, we can map 8 out of 9. I hope I will be able to map 9 out of 9 conclusions of the conclusions proposed by Pico della Mirandola to the commentary on of Simplicius, of Priscian. So let's check what are those conclusions, in which themes he was interested. So, cognoscere actum sum non est commune cui lives sensui exteriori, sed humanis sensibus est speciale. This is one conclusion I have not been able so far to find in the commentary. I hope I will. Second, Aristoteles in libro tertio de anima non tractat nisi de parte rationali. Tertium, cum anima in se perfecte redit, tum intellectus agens ab intellectu possibili liberatur. 4. Eadem pas rationalis, ut se ipsam exciens dicitur intellectus possibilis, ut vero est talis, ut se ipsam, ut possibilis est, possit perficere, dicitur intellectus agens. Quintum, 5. Eadem pas rationalis, ut extra se vadens et procedens perficitur speciebus, quae in ipso sunt ut manens est, et dicitur intellectus in habitu. Sextum, scidi potest ex precedentibus conclusionibus quare intellectus agens quandoque arti, quandoque avitui, quandoque lumini assimilatur. Septimum, passio sensibile facta in organo solo, sensatio in anima sola recipiatur. Octavum, sicut lumen non facit colores, sed praexistentes colores potentia visibiles facet actu visibiles, ita intellectus agens non facit species, cum non essent prius, sed actu praexistentes species potentia cognoscibiles faciunt actu cognoscibiles. Nonum, cum dicit Aristoteles, non recordari post mortem quia passivus intellectus corrumpitur, per passivum intellectum possibilem intellectum intellegit. So, here we have this thing, which is quite interesting. Why is it? First of all, because Priscian, among the late Platonists, is one of those who is more energetically sustaining the harmony between Plato and Aristotle. And this is part of Pico's project. So one of the things I would like to argue is that this text, this commentary, was especially important for Pico della Mirandola because through it, he was able not to just to reconcile Plato, the divine Plato with Aristotle, but also, and which is even I think, far more difficult to reconcile the peripatetics amongst them. That is so because in this text we also have some interpretations of, for instance, we have Priscian's reading of Alexander's De Anima Mantissa. And in Priscian's reading, Alexander sustains that the rational soul is immortal. And therefore, if you read in Pico's Conclusiones, first conclusion according to Alexander, Conclusiones secundum Alexandrum Aphrodisiensi, primum, omnis anima rationalis est immortalis. And that's his interpretation of Alexander. So, that's one thing. Then I have highlighted some terms because we know that Pico thought that Aristotle's terminology was not clear enough, and therefore, instead of using nous poietikos, nous pathetikos, nous dyname, it was Pico's persuasion that the terminology of Priscian was far better, that it described better how things were, and in a way, it allowed him to conciliate the opinions of all the Greek philosophers, and now this is the important point, and the greatest of the commentators, I mean, commentator, between the Arabs. It is Averroes. Why? Because in a certain passage of this commentary, Priscian also sustains that the potential intellect is one for the entire human species. This is quite convenient because one of the common accusations against Averroes by those learning Greek is, he's wrong. And he's wrong because of the very reason that he does not, Averroes did not know Greek. He was unable to read the original, therefore he misunderstood completely Aristotle. And then you have here a Greek commentator, which in a way seems to agree with Averroes, and therefore he was used in this way for matter of concord, let's say, materia concordia, by Pico della Mirandola. It's not only that, but and this is the last point I want to do regarding the reception of this text. It was also probably the main authority for Pico's theory of the soul. And we know that because he uses some images and some language, which is it's very close to that of Priscian, in a private conversation he had with Agostino Nifo. And we know this not because of any of Pico's works, but we know that because it is reported by Agostino Nifo years after in one of his works. Now, I want us to read this very interesting passage, which I think it's not received so much attention in scholarship. So Nifo says that he was once traveling to Bologna, and he was in the same group as Pico della Mirandola. So he had those doubts about Averroes, the theory of the soul. And so he asked Pico, what do you think about this particular passage? So, quae sit, is text 2, quae sit opinio Platonis de multitudine animarum secundum comite Mirandolanum, and says Agostino Nifo. The question is, they are discussing about Al-Ghazali's Destructio Destructionis. Aid Al-Ghazal, si forte aliquis diceret quod opinio Platonis est vera, videlicet quod anima est una et antiqua, et divisibilis divisione corporum, et incorporea separatione redit ad suam radicem et unitur. Ego, says Nifo, diu considerans verbum istut, et cum inspexi hoc ipsum steti in dubio, et petivi declarationi milius pici Mirandolani. Dixit comes Mirandolanus, corona nostra aetatis, in corbula, I suppose that is a sort of chariot, in corbula me petente bononiam, quod opinio Platonis ponit unam ideam animarum, quae se habet respecto animarum sicut lignae voltis, he uses this Italian word, in voltis et arcubus domorum. Dicebat enim, quod sicut ligna illa subterposita lapidibus incalcinatis ad modum arcus post exicatione milorum remota dimitum vestigium eorum, quod vocatur voltas eu arcus, sic est una idea numero omnium animarum, quae cum corpora formantur a virtute generativa, egreditur illa et recedit demititque eius umbram seu vestigium eius, quod anima vocatur, et sic dixit dictum Isaac Israelitae, Al-Bagab is a 13th century Averroist, e intellegi, escilicet, cum dicit animam esse perductam in umbram, intellegitur igitur ideae. Ista ergo resolutio seu vestigium apud Platonem anima erat, et is, Pico de la Mirandola, illam ideam seminarium seu radicem dicebat, et tum dicit Plato, quod cum anima ed esserunt corpora, tunc redeont adearum seminarium, in tantum quod vestigia illa quae anima erant, amplius non sunt pos. Redundat in sum seminarium, ut dicit, et hanc opinionem dixit esse Platonis ille vir, Pico de la Mirandola, et ita Plato posuit omnes animas esse unam in radice plures autem originaliter. So here we have this marvelous, it is an amazing portrait in which you have a testimony of which how Pico de la Mirandola was thinking about the theory of harmonizing the theory of Plato, of the Platonists, with the unity of intellect of the Averroists and the peripatetics. And because of this, I think this commentary was really made famous. As I repeat, this person was the first scholar we know about who quoted and used this text. I have the project at some point of writing a reconstruction of the theory of intellect of Pico de la Mirandola. The book will be called De Intellectus Concordia, but the time will come. Now, back to the philosophy of mathematics. So everyone was enthusiastic about this text. Finally, we have conquered. Now Averroes is right, and Alexander is also right in a way, and Plato is right, and we are all happy. And alas, the Reformation and wars are happening all around, but anyway, we have this kind of ideal concord. So this is not the only thing. And now is when I go to the philosophy of mathematics that Pico de la Mirandola took from Priscian. And this is when, for those working on mathematical causality, things become spooky. So let's check Pico's conclusions on mathematics. Pico de la Mirandola, conclusiones de mathematicis secundum opinionem propria. It's his own opinion. First conclusion, Mathematicae non sunt verae scientiae. Mathematics are not real sciences. Secunda conclusio, si felicitas sit in speculativa perfectione, mathematicae non faciunt ad felicitatem. He didn't like math, as you can tell. Tertia conclusio, mathematicae scientia non sunt propter se, sed ut via ad alias scientias quarendas. Quarta conclusio, sic ut subjectia mathematicorum si absolute accipiuntur intellectum nihil perficiunt, ita si ut imagines accipiantur superiorum, immediate nos ad intelligibilium speculationem mano ducum. So there is some kind of utility for mathematics. There is some hope. I will skip the number 5 because then I need to speak about the calculatores oxonienses, and we don't have time for that. But the 6th is quite interesting. Nihil magis nocibum, hoces novis Luca. Nihil magis nocibum theologo, quam frequens et assiduo in mathematicis Euclidis exercitatio. So those those are the conclusions regarding the philosophy of mathematics of Pico della Mirandola. I can see Luca now. And now we need to explain why. Okay, I will try to explain why, and I will defend that this opinion comes from Priscian. And this is, what I will explain now is a complement, so to speak, to my former research, which has been delivered in Accademia. And while writing this book, I came to the conclusion that those 16th century philosophers defending that was Proclus's opinion that mathematics is not a science and that there is no scientific demonstration in mathematics, were reading Proclus through Simplicius. Why? Because all of them knew very well, it was between the canonical texts of the University of Padua and Bologna, they knew very well the Greek of Priscian, which happens to be very similar to that of Proclus, but his philosophy is not exactly the same. So my hypothesis, which is, I think that it was very natural that while reading Proclus, they tend to cast on Proclus some of the previous knowledge and assimilate when, for instance, Priscian uses probole and phaedesis and logoi usiotes ente psychejos phantasta kaitautata mathematica and all those things. This is the kind of language, of course, you find in, you will find in Proclus and in Syrianus, but Syrianus was not so famous by that time. Therefore, I will share with you some passages too from the commentary from Book 3. As you remember, in Book 3, Chapter 4, we have the anima, of course. We have this discussion of the degrees of abstraction. And then Aristotle uses a line and mathematics as an example. This is the occasion for Priscian for introducing his theory and his ontology of mathematics. So the entire philosophy of mathematics of this person is in the section which people of the time at universities were more interested in. This is also very, very important. So they wouldn't ignore that, because if you want to learn the theory of the passive intellect, so to speak, the intellectus exciens of Priscian, then you need to go through the philosophy of mathematics. So the position in the very text is also important. I suppose I still have time, I hope. Okay, if you need to, I mean, you can shoot me when okay. Okay, I will remain silent. Silent. Okay, so we have this theory, and I will read it in Greek, but you have the English translation, because we have. I suppose that common people, I mean, normal people, don't read Priscian when they are, before sleeping. So you have the translation because it's not an unusual text. So he says, Epigignos ke ge kaito de hepsiche, alatas in bebekota, kai epakoluthunta teusia, ujos kai isthesis kai fantasia ta atoma, allata koina, logikos pereuta energusa, kai to prosalela autona coluthon e antitheton, proergumenon te kai hepomenon theorusa, hospasai hyperita ennila etegnai, edede, kai hai mathematikai legomenai epistemai, legomenai, so-called science, legomenai epistemai, udegar autai usias, alas gemata kai megece kai pace kai kineseis, kai prosalela sinfonias episcopusi, utus usiodeis auton logos, adiastato igar kai genomeno iautoi, alatas ebebebekotos epe auton kai diageterotetos, proelthusas diastases kai merismos. Therefore, you have the translation, so Priscian argument, which is linked to his theory of intellect. So unfortunately, now I need to dwell in his theory of intellect for a minute. His theory is that there is this nous, as always, and then this nous spans in a way, and it creates, as always, multiplicity. But when it becomes what is called deutera zoe, a secondary life, it's what in Aristotelian terms is a psyche. So this intellectual entity, as it emanates, as it goes outside itself, it creates a shadow of life, which is animal life, and it is not intellectual life. And as the intellect permeates in a sort of cascade of intellectual-like powers, all the degrees of being, it creates, so to speak, shadows of itself. And these shadows of the intellect are our common cognitive powers: fantasy, perception, and logos. All of those are just expressions of the intellect. And that's why they tend to revert to intellect in their activity. But what happens about mathematics? And then Priscian said, well, we have two kinds of mathematics. We have the mathematics of the divine Pythagoras, and then we have the mathematics of the mathematicians. And they don't deal with the same objects. That's interesting. Why? Because the mathematics of the mathematicians deal with abstracted, and by that I mean separated quantity. So we have this power, which is fantasia. And when mathematicians speak about quantity, about numbers, figures, and other processes, quantitative processes, these entities as such are in imagination, and they are an accident of fantasy. They are accidents. So Priscian's theory is that something which is not a ousia is deprived of real causation. Therefore, when we do mathematics, we establish universal rules about quantity itself, but without causes. No one of the four causes can be found amongst, that's the important thing, mathematical objects. Why amongst? Because if you go outside, so to speak, the realm of fantasy, and you look for the intellectual causes of mathematical objects, you will find that they are, of course, ousiodes arithmoi, and those are not quantitative numbers, but those are forms. So what Priscian says, which you can also find in Syrianus, for instance, in his commentary on the metaphysics, is, well, when the ancient Pythagoreans spoke about number as a divine thing, they were, by homonymy, speaking about forms like numbers. Therefore, you have the sacred mathematics, which he respects a lot, and then you have, and here is the second quotation, I will only read what you have is text 6. I have this highlighted passage, and he's comparing how physics is a science, but strangely enough, mathematics is not. And he says, Uchi de he mathematike, Allah hosfesin Platon, gephira eoiken. It's like a bridge, mathematics. The word gephira does not come from the Republic. Plato does not use it. Arche garaute, hos kai autos apophaineta philosophos, ha meoide, mesa de kai kedelete, ex hon meoide. Dioti, he mathematike, αποτελέητα τον αιτιον, το με τας ουσίας επισκοπέισθαι. Το με τας ουσίας επισκοπέισθαι, kai dia tuto αποτελεί. I mean, it is deprived of causation because it does not contemplate substances. Therefore, it's not a science, because a science is about causation, it's about causes. And the elaboration of, for instance, Piccolomini, about whom I want to speak now, is that mathematics is about reasons, so to speak, but not about causes, which is different. You have an argument for saying how this theorem is true, but it's not a causative argument. It's an argument of another kind, because there is no causation in fantasy. There is no causation in imagination. And now, is this an outrageous, strange conclusion? Of course not. Because if you read very carefully the seventh book of the Republic, the Divine Plato, you will find this opinion, which was today quoted by Professor Ferrari. And here you have, he's comparing dialectics to mathematics. As you very well remember, he says, and I read now the Greek, you have, no, you don't have the translation, but you all know by heart. So he says, Haide loipai hastuontos ti ephamen epilambanestai, geometrias te kaitas taute hepomenas, horomen, we see, horomen hos oneirotus in mem periton. This science dream about being. They dream about being. Oneirotus in, this is so beautiful. Oneirotus in periton. Hypar, dream, adinaton autais eiden, geos an hypotheses in chromenai tautas akinetos eosin. So, as you all know, until we engage in dialectics, according to Plato, until we are able to account for the principle of mathematics from outside, mathematics are not scientific, because they are not an hypotheton. And you have another highlight line. Has epistemas mem polakis proseipomen diaethos. We call them science because it is our custom. Diaethos. Deontaide onomatos alu. But mathematics needs another name. And he says that it is dianoia, of course, which is not episteme. So that's why this talk is the dreams of quantity, because this theory was, this passage, but people like Priscian, was used to say that, well, you see, according to Eudamio Aristoteles, dreams are an operation also accidental of fantasia. Therefore, if we interpret Plato and Aristotle together, they both, Plato is here saying that mathematics are made, the mathematics about which we speak when we are children and we do our theorems and all that, they are made out of the same stuff of dreams. They have the same kind of reality. They are projections of an eternal of an eternal being, which is not quantitative. It is called arithmos only by homonymy. And therefore, it's, and I will, before I am shot, I will conclude. And this leads us to the 16th century. I have found so many interesting figures because you think, well, it is the Platonists, and it was the recovery of Platonism, the thing that moved the so-called authors, the authors of the so-called scientific revolution to engage in mathematics. Well, that might and seems to be right, but there is this neglected and quite interesting tradition, the tradition of the dreams of quantity of the Platonists, which is that it was factually a branch, there is a branch of Platonism, 16th century and 15th century Platonism, which is a anti-mathematical Platonism. And one very clear, beautiful, and influential example of that is the Spaniard Jesuit, Benito Pereira, who wrote a very important text on natural philosophy in the eve of the scientific revolution, and he defended that not only that mathematics is not a science, but the mathematization of nature is impossible. And he did that not by using Aristotle, but using simply Priscian, Proclus, and Plato. And I want to read what he says. It's a very stimulating passage. But this is the state of the question in the 16th century, to see the influence of this trending. Ok, si dice, mea opinio est, mathematicas disciplinas non esse proprias scientias, in quam opinionem adducor tum alis tum hoc uno maxime argumento. Scire est rem per causam cognoscere, propter quam res est, et scientia est demonstrationis effectus, demonstratio autem loquor de perfectissimo demonstrationis genere, constare debet ex iis quae sunt per se et propria eiusco demonstratur, quae vero sunt per accidens et communia excluduntur a perfectis demonstrationibus. Sed mathematicus neque considera de sentiam quantitatis, that's the metaphysician, neque affectiones eius tractat prout manant ex tali essentia, neque declarat eas per proprias causas, propter quam insunt quantitati, neque configit demonstrationes suas ex predictis propris et per se, sed ex communibus et per accidens, ergo doctrina mathematica non est proprie scientia. Major uius syllogismi non eget probatione, et enim aperte licitur ex iis quae scripta sum ab Aristotele in priorum analyticorum. So far so Jesuit. But now, confirmatio minoris ducitur ex iis quae scribit Plato in septimo libro de Republica dicens mathematicos somniare circa quantitatem, et in tractandis suis demonstrationibus non scientificae, sed ex quibusdam suppositionibus procedere. Quam ob rem non vult doctrina meorum appellare intelligentiam aut scientiam, sed tantum cogitationem. In quam sententiam Priscian? Oh no. Quam multa scribit Proclus in primo librum suorum commentariorum in Euclidem. So you have Plato, you have the opinion that mathematics is not a science, and you have Priscian's opinion attributed to Proclus. Again, yet again. I'm quite sure, and I will show, I have evidence that Pereira, this person, read Piccolomini, but he didn't read my book, what you can do. So, thank you.
Are we back on the original schedule?
I think so. So I think we can make at least 15 minutes discussion. Or? Oh, okay. You were the first. Or? Ah, no, okay. Then... Oh, we have time. We have time. So 15, 20 minutes. So this,
15.
okay, questions, please. Yes, yes.
Just like to make a comment on Álvaro's paper, which I found really stimulating. I congratulate you on an excellent analysis. I just have an observation about what's going on with the bridge, mathematics as the bridge in the later Neoplatonists, that the position of the pseudo-simplicius there, which you, I think, explained very clearly, actually, it's quite close to Proclus in some ways. Proclus, there are different Procluses, undoubtedly. He is a complex figure. And there's the Proclus of the Euclid commentary, the Proclus of the Euclid commentary. Then there's the Proclus of the Elements of Theology. And there's the Proclus of the Timaeus commentary. And they have slightly different views. Oh, there's also the Proclus of the Platonic Theology. They have slightly different views of the status of mathematical objects. And Pseudo-Simplicius is part of the entourage of Damascius. And so you have a kind of a critical analysis of the Syrianus Proclus type of system. And what's happening in Pseudo-Simplicius is certain tendencies that are perhaps already in Proclus are being brought into relief. And I think this sort of ambiguous status of mathematical objects, and in a certain sense, a downgrading of them in certain respects, is something you find in some aspects of Proclus, but not in others. So I think we need to be aware of that kind of subtle deviations that are taking place among the Athenian Neoplatonists. But I think what you've pointed out with the Pseudo-Simplicius is very valid and very important. And the connection with Pico is extremely interesting.
Thank you. More questions, please.
Yes, Álvaro, well done. Beautiful paper. Just a footnote. Simplicio exegesis peripsuches is a manuscript, as you know, in the Laurentiana, 8521, if I remember well, which is annotated by Poliziano. So Pico discovered Simplicius with Poliziano in the very moment when they were conflicting harshly with Ficino and astrology. And as a matter of fact, mathematici are also astrologers.
Álvaro, I have a question for you. What happened to the mathematics of divine Pythagoras?
What happened to them? Well, they will remain there. In a way, they are a symbol. Well, so as you surely remember, in the very beginning of the Platonic theology, Proclus speaks of many ways of doing theology. Dialecticos, enthusiasticos, symbolicos, and mythologicos. And for Proclus, as for, I think, the late Platonists, also for Syrianus, that is the case, mathematics, it's an imagine of the divine. That's why you have, for instance, that it's not completely unimportant. I mean, no, it remains as the bridge. Why? Because in my book, I have this comment. What is the difference between a triangle and a siren? They are both are objects according to the theory. They are both objects of fantasy. They exist just in imagination because there is no perfect triangle outside imagination, such an image. Also, the siren or the centaur or the Pegasus, they just exist in imagination. But the difference is that the triangle is the expression of a higher reality. So you as a human being, you are unable, according to Proclus, you don't have direct access to nous, to intellect. So we work as a sort of translation machines, so to speak. We transform the divine in symbols or in theorems in order for us to understand it. So we degrade the divine to culture. Proclus wouldn't say that, but if you think, I find deeply about what Proclus is saying, every form of culture is a kind of expression of the divine. Because even in De Providentia, he says that people acting and trying to do beautiful acts, they are in their way imitating the divine. But this, for Proclus and for Syrianus, this is very clear in mathematics. By the way, it's not that always a siren or a poem is meaningless for those people. Why? Because you have inspired poets, and those inspired poets, according to Proclus, are those who are able to translate into myth a form. So a poem of a theorem are different expressions of a divine reality if they are rightly done. It's just that for we human beings, it's very easy to do mathematics because we are very quantity sensitive, so to speak.
Then is the theology and
Yes, you do mathematics, but then you need to find the meaning of the mathematics you are doing. And if you've read some passages from Proclus' commentary on Euclid, that's what he had. That's what he does. He explains mathematics, ta fantasta, and then he says, well, the circle means the perfection because it can, and generation because it can contain all the polyhedra and until the infinite, which is the point again. So it is a symbol in a way. You read it symbolically, and that's why this particular genus of theology is called symbolic for him.
Thank you.
It remains divine.
Yes, I wanted to remain divine. You explained that very well, and I thank you for doing so because actually you really set the stage for Marco Gione's presentation, which is specifically, from numbers to gods. It's coming up.
I have a question for Professor Sacconi. I found your explanation fascinating. I had never heard of it before. And the sphere within the box in particular, and the bits that were missing. And my question is, given that your mathematical explanation, do you think that accounts for large language models? What's the word? I've lost the word. Yes, thank you. I just lost the word. Does it account for hallucination? And if so, is hallucination an insoluble problem for large language models? Do you think if that is the case, then is hallucination an insoluble problem?
first I have to give my answer. Yes, I think that it, if not explained, is certainly related to hallucination. That's almost for sure. Things that you have to think that to mitigate this problem, there are processes, so there is a lot of research. So, but definitely this could be the point, because you know that point in some sense is close because it is in the cube, but it is not in the sphere. Understand that? So this is, in this sense, it is a problem. And the other question, sorry, can you repeat a moment? You told me, if so, yes. Well, insoluble, this really honestly depends, because you can, there is the cursor of dimensionality, but there is also the blessing of dimensionality for next year, possibly. So it's possible to have this kind of solution, that it's true that points become very sparse, very, no? So in this sense, you have this small probability, so a lot of hallucination. But it's also true that because of that, you can I mean, your clustering can work. You can cluster better in some sense, not a single point, but group of points. So in some sense, you can let's say, reduce the a bit, not the single hallucination, but let me say the ratio, the taxon rate of hallucination. This you can try to figure out at the moment, for what I know. Now, I would like to, I really was impressed by the lecture, so say, by Álvaro. And no, because I have a lot of stimulus regarding two aspects. One is an historical one. From your lecture, I really feel how big was the, let me say, let's say the problem of, for example, Galilei, once almost in those years, because I mean, he was trying to introduce some maths, and that is very important, and to give content to this mathematics. So I wonder if he was so conscious about that point of view, that mathematics per se is a kind of fantasia, while he wanted to understand nature. Moreover, also you can follow also these small strains when Newton say hypothesis non fingo, no? So why? I don't know, but it is how, no? Galileo was definitely aware, but he used Simplicio, so I mean, come on. But the point is that these people were very aware, so me too have to look how did they cope with this problem in such a very high level of understanding, first. And second, I am very, very interested indeed in this fact that is not scientia, no? This is possibly my ignorance of philology, because I think too that mathematics, for example, is not a scientia, and almost no serious mathematician thinks like that. Because scientia has to do with, in some sense, with matter. And so when these people speaks about scientia, if I understand rightly, is because you have to link causes for the causation principle, no? And while mathematics is not related to. But then I wonder if this tradition that you have exposed so well and is so deep, so what is for them understanding that is clearly before, close to the scientific revolution, but what is for them understanding a kind of regular phenomena? Do you understand my question? Because the problem of mathematics, the possibility to apply it, this was really a big issue, depends on the fact that you have kind of, how can I say, a regular process, I mean, that repeats. And in some sense, mathematics can catch the repetition and connect two kinds of repetitions. While the single fact, nature, no, if you think as something that is only once, clearly it's outside of science. So for these people, how do they have, do they have let me say, relation between something that repeats, like the solar, the movement? How do they feel this repetition? How do they understood then? Because it's true, if you look to quantity, some mathematics, I spent last year trying to show that mathematics has to do with quantity, but also not only. But follow for the moment these ideas. How do they cope with this aspect of nature?
I have, well, I will try. So regarding, for instance, Galileo, Galileo was aware of this argument, and we know that because he read Jacopo Mazzoni's book. Jacopo Mazzoni was a philosopher who was teaching both in Pisa and here in Rome, and he wrote this fantastic and very lengthy book, which is called In Universam Platonis et Aristotelis Philosophiam Praeludia. And in the 14th book of this work, he proposed Pereira's argument, and he tries to defend that mathematics, in a way, has a special sort of causation, which is particular to mathematics. It does not exist anywhere else. And although Galileo does not engage in a lengthy discussion on this, and although Galileo disagreed with some positions, mostly regarding astronomy, of Jacopo Mazzoni, he seems to have endorsed some of the answers. That's something that needs to be done, but I have some evidence that, and we know they were friends, they were teaching together in the same university, and Mazzoni had Galileo, young Galileo, at his protégé while in Pisa. So it's quite, it's almost impossible, I think, to suggest that Galileo was not aware that it was this kind of, he also was friends with Jesuits, and he was very interested in the textbooks of natural philosophy. And factually, this kind of argument appears mostly in lectures on natural philosophy, on physics. It does not appear in mathematical teaching, when you have people like Clavius, Biancani, and others, Borri, Cristoforo Borri. And if you check the teaching in manuscript, you will find that they address this argument. And they also, the mathematicians, the Jesuits, mathematicians against the natural philosophers, try to defend. It's the first argument, or one of the arguments they need to address before teaching mathematics. So that happened here in the Collegio Romano. At the same time, Pereira and Clavius were teaching, and they hated each other. So if someone has signed, you could write a play about this very interesting chapter of the history of science. Now, regarding the mathematization of nature, how you have regularity from the perspective. Now, it's very difficult because each author has a different perspective. But I will speak from, for instance, Pereira or Piccolomini, who are those who are defending this very, very strongly. Although Pereira is much more, it's much more incisive than Piccolomini, perhaps because the situation was, the context was also different. So for them, the world has quantitative traits, and the thing you do is that you create a sort of replica of the world in your fantasy. As soon as you create this replica of the world, it becomes quantitative. If you quantify something, that's a very interesting fact. If you quantify something for them, you are not speaking anymore about the thing you think you are speaking of, but you create a quantitative replica in your fantasy. Therefore, it's called how many degrees you measure, you create a replica. So it is a quantitative entity that per accidens, by approximation, resembles or catches the nature of reality outside fantasia. Now, that's Piccolomini's argument in the end. He says we cannot, and perhaps he is right, we cannot do natural philosophy through mathematics, because when we do mathematics, we describe how things behave. And we predict, by supposing regularity, we predict how things behave, but we cannot mathematically tell why they behave as they do. So Piccolomini's argument is that there is some qualitative aspect, which is a very Aristotelian argument, but it's also, I mean, his main authorities are Neoplatonists. And there is something that can, the why it behaves in this way and not in another way, it's a question which cannot be addressed through mathematics. Either you do metaphysics, or either you do a kind of natural philosophy which speaks about causation, qualitative causation. That's why this argument was used against, and eventually those proposing a mathematized science of nature would accept it. Because Newton would say, I won't explain how gravity works as it works. I will give you a description, hypothesis non fingo. Why? Because I don't speak about the substance of things. I speak about how quantitatively they behave. So it was, that has been defended by Dimitri Levitin, for instance, in his book, The Kingdom of Darkness, about Newton's philosophy of science. And I think he's right. So that's what welcome.
No mathematical space,
Or there are
simple
lots
as
of
that.
mathematical spaces.
For abstract objects, yes. There's only one real space, intelligible, but it's not space, it's intelligibility in thinking. No, he didn't dodge the question, actually. I already have the title and the topic for next year. I was doing my thinking. Well, and I can repartee. Plotinus develops the very interesting concept of unfigured figures. And in the intelligible, figures are unfigured. The Greek term is aschemata, schemata. So for next, so you have to stay tuned. Next year, unfigured figures and the geometry of the intelligible. So there is no space, but they're unfigured figures. Why? Because why they're unfigured? No space, but they're still there. And you have to wait till next year.
Just 2 seconds for next year, maybe. The dimension of imagination in the intelligible words. World 5-8, 5-6. The noeta are agalmata. Agalmata are schemata, but not aschemata, schemata. Yeah. But not in the sense of spatiality, of of separating spatiality and frontality, but in sense of sphericity, not linear figurality, but something else.
I Actually, Plotinus's definition of existence is a separation from the one, not dimension, no extension, no distance, separation. So
Yes, and in the intelligible worlds, you have also always 5-8. The quality is adiastaton.
exactly.
So and you have no metaxu, no in between, also
No.
between the one and the nous, and also between the nous and the soul.
Thank you for reminding me about the astaton. Yes, thank you.
Telos, schematon.
Coffee break.
Possiamo pure vedere il fuoco. Sì. Non ha caduta. No, ma non... Scusa, fatto Udine. Se regolari dicono Udine, ma l'etimologia tra l'altro è incerta. Interessante. Quindi potrebbe anche essere...
So welcome back to this session and the first day of the Foro di Studi Avanzati. I will moderate or perhaps immoderate this session on thinking beyond rationality. Before doing that, I want to call your attention upon an interesting fact, which is that this is the ninth edition of the Foro di Studi Avanzati, so it is our first Ennead. But if you count the number of interventions in this conference, including the welcome and the goodbye speech, as well as the concert, you will obtain 54, which means that each of us has a treatise of the Enneads. We have six Enneads, so you can try to figure out which treatise each of you. So it is my pleasure to introduce Salvatore Lavecchia from the Università degli Studi di Udine, and he will speak today about number as a source of harmonious rhythm, some Platonic and Plotinian suggestions. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Álvaro. So I will almost skip my considerations concerning Plato because they would take more time than we have at disposal, and it would be nice if we have time for discussion as in the previous session. So just few considerations on Plato. Plato, like later Plotinus, is not a representative of a monism which eliminates alterity or difference as an autonomous reality. So both Plato and Plotinus are striving to confer significance to the presence of another reality beside the origin of all reality. And so they characterize their principle of all being, of all forms of beings, in order to give also a justification for alterity, for difference, that is for multiplicity. And Plato does it, according to my perception, basing his experience of the origin of all beings on experience of a supreme good intended as unconditional relationality, that is as an origin implying in itself the principle both of unity and of multiplicity. So I interpret the evidence concerning the so-called agrapha dogmata concerning two principles of being, the one and the undeterminate dyad, not as referring to a more or less weak form of dualism, but as referring to the implication that the good is fundament both of the principle of unity and of the principle of multiplicity. So it's not unsurprising that Aristotle deals with these subjects under the title on the good, not on the one or on the undetermined dyad. And as some of us know, we have some evidence in the testimonies concerning Plato's regarding the so-called intelligible numbers. The intelligible numbers, which according to Theophrastus, for example, permeates also the world of the forms, and are entities, or entities is not so precise, are something between the two principles of the one and undetermined dyad and the world of the forms, with almost two faces, one towards the principles and one face towards the forms. And the forms selves are characterized in some testimonies as in intimate relation to number. And my thesis, which I will deal more explicitly concerning Plotinus, is that number already for Plato might refer, so if we wish to perceive a specific characteristic of number, might refer to an eminently rhythmical dimension. Number is representing, according to my perception, the rhythmical dimension of reality, of course representing this dimension at the highest level in the world of the forms. And we have, as we know, some hints at the relationship of number and rhythm or music in Plato. Think to the constitution of the world soul in Timaeus. The musical, that is mathematical logoi are permeating the constitution of the world soul. And but we do not have any explicit evidence of a possible consideration of number as rhythmicality, as original rhythmicality, from the texts of Plato. And my hypothesis, which is very provoking and very general in this context, is that the testimonies relating to the intelligible numbers as quaternity and decad, both in Aristotle, are actually pointing to not, of course, not to a quantified quaternity or decad, but to an original rhythmicality which is emerging in contexts like the Philebos, where we have all forms of being generated by 4 principles. The apeiron, unlimited, undeterminate, the limit, peras, the mixture of both, and the cause of mixture, the nous and Sophia. And I think we can perceive these 4 principles as related each other by an original rhythmicality shaping harmony and harmonious relationships at every level of reality. A little hint to this is that the characterization of the 4 principles is preceded by an example concerning words and music and rhythms. And so this is a brief introduction to Plato. I read yet now my text concerning Plotinus. Like Plato, also Plotinus does not represent a rigid monism in which any alterity or difference with respect to the one ought to be intended as illusion. In fact, the metaphysics of the one presupposed by Plotinus is an eminently relational. This is evident in Plotinus's description of the freedom of the one in 6.8, treatise 39:19. In this chapter of treatise 39, the one is described as free not only from every form of being, but also from itself. And this freedom from itself implies that the absolute unity of the one is not something determining or imprisoning the one. On the contrary, the one paradoxically transcends or seems to transcend, indeed, even the unity, thus producing a reality which the one can live outside of itself. That is, a reality which is an authentic alterity, which implies a real difference from the one. The one is, in other words, like the good in Plato's philosophy, intrinsically relational, diffusivum sui. We have also some passages in Plotinus which points to this characteristic of the one, but I'm not dealing with them now. And this means intrinsically that the one is open towards relationality and therefore towards multiplicity. This is the reason why Plotinus, like Plato, connects the origin of number with the highest level of reality after the one in itself. That is, he connects the number with the relation between the one and the undeterminate duality, Aoristos duas, like in the testimonies concerning Plato's Agrapha Dogmata. This relationship between the one and the undeterminate duality produces the supreme intellect, so it's not a properly way of saying it. Whereas number and intellect, nous, as well as being, ousia, are to be perceived as an unity. Beyond any temporal sequence, number is namely produced by being, alterity, and identity, which in turn constitute the supreme intellect. 5.1, chapter 4. At the aforesaid level of reality, the level of the nous, number is essential, ousiodes. I prefer essential instead of substantial as a translation, ousiodes arithmos, not to be intended as a sum or sequence of unities, but, I say through my words, as a conscious and as a concrete, and conscious intelligible individuality, which is the specific connotation of number in the life of the supreme intellect. In a very dense passage of Treatise 34, 6, 6, 9, 36, 39, I will give paraphrases of it. Plotinus describes the essential number as a reality contemplated together with the intelligible beings and cooperating to their generation of intelligible beings. That is, the number is a reality which is primarily subsisting in being, in ousia, and together with being, with ousia, as well as preceding the intelligible beings, logically preceding, not temporally preceding. Whereas the intelligible beings have in number their fundament, spring, root, origin. This is all content of these 3 lines of 669. Preceding all intelligible beings, number is not those beings, but the power which operates the differentiation between being and put ousia in travail with multiplicity. Number can be therefore identified either with the essence or the actual activity, energeia of ousia, of being. And the supreme living being and intellect is number. So that being in itself is number in its quality of being manifestation of the one. Whereas the intelligible beings are the unfolded number. And the intellect is number moving within itself, encompassing the supreme living being. This is always 6, 6, 9, but lines 24, 31. And the provoking invitation of Plotinus, the implicit invitation of Plotinus, is that we should consider all these aspects, identity, alterity, living being, essence, ousia, intellect, and so on, as a dynamic unity beyond time, of course, and beyond space. The aforesaid characterization of the relationship between number, intelligible being, and intellect has to be understood as pointing not to a hierarchy, but to a dynamic, non-temporal, non-spatial unity in which intellect, being, intelligible beings, and supreme living being constitutes the highest and therefore conscious manifestation of the one. That is the supreme intellect as well as the intelligible world. But still, we have no specific characterization of number. And this explicit characterization is actually not given in a form which we would wish to have in order to say, yes, Plotinus identifies the specific quality of number with characteristic A or B or C. In order to near ourselves to this specificity, specific characteristic of number, I start from the works of Svetla, Slaveva-Griffin, which connects number, that is ordered multiplicity, with the following qualities. I quote Svetla, multiplicity is motion away or distancing from the one in an orderly sequence, expressed by the idea of the overflow of the one. This orderly sequence has an outward, and inward direction. Exactly the concentration, end of quotation, exactly the concentration on the both outward and inward direction emphasized by Svetla may give a hint concerning the specific quality originally manifested by number. And we have to strive and think these both directions, these directions, inward and outward, as a non-temporal and non-spatial unity. That is, we are invited to think these opposite directions actually transcending linearity. So I wish to show the continuity with the contribution, with the end of the contribution of Svetla, pointing now to this aspect. And actually, we have in several passages of Plotinus an explicit reference to the dynamics of intelligible world, not as a dynamics which could be translated in linear notions, but as a spherical dynamics. I do not quote the single passages, 6, 5, 10, 5, 8, 9, 2, 9, 17, 6, 7, 15, etc. This dynamics is described in the very important fourth chapter of Ennead 5.8, Treatise 31, as a dynamic of transparence in which every being, every intelligible being, through manifesting itself, instantaneously thus manifest every other intelligible being, the totality of the intelligible world, the unity of the intellect, and in a certain sense, the one self. And this dynamics is translated a few chapters after the fourth chapter of Ennead 5.8 in the image of a sphere in which every point is the center, and every point, through manifesting itself, manifests indeed every other point, the center and the totality of the sphere, which is the relationship between this image, this characteristic of thorough transparency on the one side and sphericity on the other side, which is the relationship of these two aspects with this inward and outward direction of characterizing the origin of multiplicity and, as a consequence, the origin of number. The relationship is a relationship which is not explicit in Plotinus, but we can explicate this relationship, and I did it also in other contributions during the last year here at FSA. And now I'll be very, very synthetical. We can describe the sphere characterizing the intelligible world as a non-spatial and non-temporal movement. Plotinus points in many passages to intelligible movement, kinesis. This is a very strong difference from Aristotle. We can imagine this sphere as a non-temporal, non-spatial movement in which every point of the sphere is both infinite concentration and infinite expansion. That is both infinite inward relationship to itself and outward relationship to all other points and the totality of the sphere, whereas this non-temporal and non-spatial movement could be, according to my perception, considered as the original harmony or rhythm constituting and permeating the highest form of being, that is the nous, the intellect, and the noeta, the intelligible world. And my question and my hypothesis, which I express in this context very, very synthetically, is maybe is this original spherical, non-temporal and non-spatial rhythmicity the specific characteristic which is to be connected to number, differentiated number from ousia, intellect, living being, and so on, but of course not separating number from them. So that we would have in number this rhythmical aspect, this harmonia. Plotinus points at in some passages to the harmonia of the intelligible words, for example 2, 9, 17, 38, 40. And so we would have a clarification of number, which, according to my perception, could be a satisfying one. Why a satisfying one? Because if we explicate this rhythmical dimension, we can much more understand this unity of intellect, essence, vitality, and being as unity, as harmonious unity, as dynamic unity of unity, the repetition, and multiplicity. And also in the horizon of Plotinus, we could have a sort of original quaternity if we think of a number as generated by the relationship between the one and the undetermined duality, 1 or 2, and 2, and on the one side, and on the other side between identity and alterity, which are the two fundamental characteristics of the intelligible words according to 6, 7, 13, 14, so that we have number as dynamically uniting the one and the undeterminate dyad or duality on the one side, with the face towards the one, and on the other side, identity and alterity of the intelligible beings with the face toward being. And this would, if this is true, I stress the fact that we do not have explicit characterizations in this direction in the texts of Plotinus. If this is true, we would have an interesting continuity between some aspects of Plato and of the testimonies concerning Plato's. I mean the testimonies concerning the intelligible numbers as quaternity, and this possible original rhythm connecting one dyad, identity, and alterity, which I would perceive in Plotinus. Last hint to these dynamics, this rhythmical dynamics, we have in Aeneas 6, 7, 15, lines 25, 26, the image of the sphere connected to the intelligible world, intended as a living sphere with many colors, poikilon, and associated with the image of a pamprosopon chrema, of a thing constituted by faces which are shining, living faces shining, dynamically shining. So according to my opinion, to my perception, these two images points to a rhythmical dynamics of the sphere of the intelligible worlds, and exactly this pointing to a rhythmical dynamics could refer to to the original rhythmicity which is generated by the original number. I conclude with this reflection. So I'm conscious that the reflections I proposed are very general, very experimental, especially what concerns quaternity or decades. So, but I find interesting also the continuity. Just let me point to this interesting historical element of this quaternity intended as original rhythm. You know Johann Sebastian Bach. So there is there was the teacher on the Conservatorio di Roma, Giancarlo Bizzi, which demonstrated that Bach worked, composed his very complicated toccata e fuga, fuga through a magical square of which the most elementary one were a square composed by the first four number. So and with this reference to Bach, I conclude my paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salvatore. It's now my pleasure to introduce Marco Ghione, who today will speak about the following topic. The name of the talk is From Numbers to Gods, the Theology of Number in Anatolius and Iamblichus. Thank you.
From the Hellenistic period onwards, the writings on the symbolic properties of numbers, especially related to the first 10 numbers, constituted a literary genre. This kind of writing also included the section on the properties of number of the Expositio Rerum Mathematicarum by Theon of Smyrna and the Theologumen Arithmeticae attributed to Iamblichus, a work that contains in some chapters various extracts from Anatolius' compendium. Since the time of Armand Delat's study, this category of writings has been traced back to arithmology, a discipline that deals with the symbolic properties of numbers and the effects that stem from these properties. Arithmology, which is synonymous with the term symbolism of numbers, examines not only the quantitative, but also the qualitative properties of numbers and mathematical entities. In order to study text dealing with the symbolic properties of numbers, it is necessary to consider the perspective of a research tradition that has significantly influenced this field. This tradition goes back to the analysis of Pythagorean literature carried out by Armand Delat at the beginning of the 20th century in his Études sur la littérature pythagoricienne. More recently, Leonid Zmud has followed the same line of his investigation. According to Zmud, the term arithmology defines the discipline devoted to the qualitative properties of numbers, which arose in the context of Greek thought, following the achievements of Platonic and the academic philosophy. Some of the oldest surviving arithmological digressions can be found in the works of Philo of Alexandria. In fact, Philo was the author of a lost treatise on numbers, the Peri-Arithmo. Iamblichus, disciple of Porphyry of Tyre, was originally a student of Anatolius of Alexandria, the author of a treatise on the Decad. He brought a shift in the Neoplatonic tradition towards the study and practice of pagan theology and theology. The impact of this innovation on Neoplatonic thought was decisive, to the point that Iamblichus earned the title of the second founder of Neoplatonism. The exegesis of Iamblichus, a thinker deeply influenced by the religious and mysterious doctrines originated in the Near East, is based on a plurality of sources. To them, he gave solid authority, such as the pseudo-Pythagorean treatise, which Iamblichus possessed and consulted. In fact, Iamblichus wrote a collection of works on Pythagorean tradition. The Pythagorean corpus of Iamblichus is probably composed of 10 books, but only 4 have survived in their entirety. The Life of Pythagoras, the Admonition to Philosophy or Protrepticus, the De Communi Mathematica Scientia, a text outlining some aspects of mathematical disciplines, the Introduction to Arithmetic of Nicomachus, a reworking of Nicomachus' treatise. The 5th, 6th, and 7th books of this collection, devoted respectively to the arithmological study of physics, ethics, and theology, have been lost. The remaining books, the 8th, 9th, and 10th, deal with the other disciplines of the Pythagorean quadrivium, geometry, music, and astronomy. The structure of the corpus shows that the early books form a kind of general introduction to the mathematical science. The middle books deal with the application and connection of arithmetic with other fields of knowledge, while the last are dedicated to individual disciplines. We can define it as a collection with an encyclopedic nature, in which the author reference to Pythagoreanism overlaps and coincides with the study of mathematical sciences and Neoplatonic philosophy. In order to understand Iamblichus' doctrine on the role of the divine number and this relation with the other categories of numbers, the extracts preserved by the Byzantine scholar Michael Psellus are particularly relevant. So we can, this one is the original manuscript from the Biblioteca Medicea Laurenziana of Collection Pythagorica. And we can pass to read the 2 texts from Psellus in the translation of Dominic O'Mara. Text 4. The philosopher Iamblichus wrote an arithmetic of higher natures, not treating of the numbers in them mathematically, nor imaging the higher kinds through analogies, nor positing them as hypostatic, self-moved, intellectual, or essential numbers, but he says that as the genus of higher natures transcends all being, so is their number, absolute and of itself. So, the other text 5 on the handout, the translation of Dominic O'Mara. In this manner, then, of the account of this wondrous arithmetic, you might relate, each in the natural flow of numbers, to the separate natural unities. But rather, this is inferior and appropriate to analogy. If one wished to see divine number better, one would define these from the higher kinds themselves. For there is a divine one, and divine monad, and divine dyad, and odd and even, transcendent and taught in higher insights. According to Dominic O'Mara, the divine number exposed in the 7th book of Iamblichus collection reveals the analogies between the numerical series and the order of the gods, which originate from the one, or the absolute principle. The divine number and the order of the gods do seem to transcend the level of pure being and of ideal numbers. Combining the testimony of text 4 with a passage from another book from the collection, the De Communi Mathematica Scientia, we can indeed assume that, according to Iamblichus, the divine number is placed at the top of an ontological ladder that includes the intelligible or eidetic number, the intellectual number, the self-moving number, and the physical number. This nuanced and stratified conception sharply contrasts with the solid dualistic understanding that can be found in Plotinus' treatise on number, the Periatrix Mon. It aligns more naturally with Iamblichus' pronounced Pythagorean inclination. In line with the Pythagoreans associated with Hippasus de Mathematicoi, Iamblichus regards the number as the primary paradigm of the creation of the cosmos, as considers mathematical entities as valuable tools for comprehending both physical and theological realities. Yet, ontological concerns are central to his philosophy. In his work, Iamblichus has introduced new ontological distinctions and levels, both in the structure of reality and in the classification of numbers. Whereas Plotinus simply states that all gods reside in the intelligible realm without further specification, Iamblichus refined the intelligible paradigm to accommodate gods who possess ontological primacy. He adopted the Pythagorean notion that the divine number is appropriate to the nature of the gods and to their power, order, and activity, and explores the affinity and similarity between numbers and the gods. Indeed, for Iamblichus, this investigation goes beyond the symbolic and reveals the ontological kinship between numbers and gods. In order to understand better Iamblichus' doctrine, we can examine a passage from the major treatise on arithmology, the Theologumena Arithmeticae, and an excerpt from On the Decad by Anatolius, Iamblichus' first master. Even Nicomachus says that the God harmonizes with the monad, since God is in germ, spermatikos, all natural things, as the monad, all the numbers. And the monad in potentially contains the things which in act appear to be most contrary, which simply are in all form of contrariety, just as the monad is seen throughout the entire introduction to arithmetic as the number capable of assuming any form by virtue of an ineffable nature, a welcome beginning, middle, and end of everything, whether we think it's composed by cohesion or by addition, just as the monad is also beginning, middle, and end of quantity, of magnitude, and of every other mathematical quality. So text 3, they, the Pythagoreans, say, therefore, that the monad is not only God, but also intellect, and male-female. Intellect indeed, because that which is in God is the most dominant, both in creation of the cosmos and in general, in every art and rational faculty. Even she doesn't manifest herself entirely in the individual natures, she is in intellect in act, being a precise identity and unchangeable by knowledge, since the monad embraces everything in herself by mental conception, epinoia, among the forms of beings, even by ecstasy, as a creative principle resembling the divine. Moreover, she does not change by reason of herself, nor does it allow any other to change, but she remains unchangeable, as also truly the moira atropos. The Theologumena, second expert on the monad, in fact brings the first number back to the same ontological level as the nous of intellect, or intellect. If we examine the short chapter on the monad from Anatolius' compendium on the Decad, we find a comparison of the same order. Realistically, the two passages come from the same arithmological source. However, text 2 seems to be openly dependent on the Nicomachus of Gerasa Introduction to Arithmetic, which Iamblichus also used a model for the fourth book of his Pythagorean collection. So text 1, the Pythagoreans call it intellect and identified it with the one, the intelligible God, the uncreated, the beautiful in itself and the good in itself. Among all the virtues, they compared it especially with wisdom, which is the virtue of the one. That which is right and united is indeed one. This one is the manuscript from the Decad. So, turning back to the text 2, to his passage, the adverb spermatikos in germ sums up the ontological and analogical function of the first number, which is reflected in the all-encompassing power of God. This idea of the monad as the vital source of the other numbers represents a common feature of the literature on numerical symbolism, which, as we'll see, is also found in the thought of Iamblichus. Indeed, Anatolius' treatise on the Decad also used this formulation, on the Decad 514, Ghione, in order to express the generative nature of the first number. The metaphor of germ or seed reveals the fecundity of monad. In text 3, in text 3, we can also see how the monad is compared to the moira atropos, according to a form of theological comparison that we find in another text of arithmology, but not in Anatolius' text. However, if we consider the general tenor of the doctrines presented in this literature, we can see that in Anatolius' text and Theologumena, numbers seem to be used mainly in a symbolic and comprehensive sense, without drawing a detailed map or a precise ontological distinction among the different categories of number. This brief analysis leads us to investigate the links between Iamblichus' teachings on the divine numbers and the arithmological reading of his contemporaries. If we follow Omar's advice, one passage of Iamblichus, in the Mysteris Egyptorum, his masterwork on theology, shows a strong affinity with the lost seventh book of Iamblichus on the divine number. The work, also called Reply to Porphyry, and traditionally known as the Mysteris Egyptorum from the Latin translation by Ficino, consists of a defense of pagan religious practices against the objections of the philosopher Porphyry, framed by a fictional Egyptian scenario. Okay. We can read the text 6. In the case of the gods, their order consists in the union of all, their primary and secondary classes, and all the multitude which is generated around them constitute altogether a totality in unity, and the totality is the unity, and their beginning and middle and end coexist in the very mode of unity, so that in respect of them, at any rate, there is no need to inquire whence unity comes upon them all. For whatever being may actually be in their case, it is that constitutes their unity. This passage shows that the order of the gods consists in their unity, ente nosei panton estin et taxis. This supreme unity that causes the corresponding order may be the monad of divine numbers, perhaps the one in its causal aspect, but even the identification of the source of cohesion is problematic. The importance of the relationship between divinity and degrees of unity in the system created by Iamblichus is further emphasized by the later Neoplatonic Damascus in the Principies. The Principies 2, who describes the gods as crystallized around the one. Another passage at the end of Mysteries, the Mysteries Egyptiorum, reiterates this view, emphasizing the strict relationship between unity and divinity. Text 7. Prior to the true beings and to the universal principles, there is the one God, prior cause even of the first God and King, remaining unmoved in the singularity of his own unity. For no object of intellection is linked to him, nor anything else. He is established as a paradigm for the self-fattering, self-generating, and only fettered God, who is true good. For it is something greater and primary and fount of all things and basic root of all the first object of intellection, which are the forms. So, this is the partial conclusion of this hints of this difficult argument. If we try to reconcile the extracts on the divine number with this passage from On Mysteries, the implication is that the divine numbers are placed on the same ontological level as the gods. In fact, both derive their unity from a cause that brings about uniform unity, monoides enosis. However, with the source we have at our disposal, specifying the role and functions of the divine numbers in the particular ontology of Iamblichus thought is very difficult. It's equally difficult to determine the relationship between the intelligible number and the sound. As we have seen, Iamblichus seemed particularly concerned with the upper and lower limits of the intelligible realms and their relationship to the realities that surround them. By placing the self-moving number, autokinetos, after the intelligible number, noetos or eidetikos, he underlines his view of the soul and the mathematical entities as mediators between the metaphysical and the sensible worlds. According to some scholars, Iamblichus' articulation of numbers, physical, ethical, divine, demonstrates the omnipresence of number and, in particular, its mediating natures. This interpretation has the advantage of highlighting the analogical power of the number in Iamblichus. On the other hand, despite the difference already underlined, it's also consistent with the doctrine of number expressed in the etymological literature and its symbolic features in a way that stresses the influences of the Pythagorean tradition of Theon of Smyrna and Anatolius on Iamblichus's theory of numbers. Thank you all.
Zucconi, who will speak about ritual and thought.
Thank you, Álvaro. Álvaro. And this is the last of the day. I also will be, or try to be, quite quick. And but let me explain what's the aim of my small contribution to this session. In the last years, speaking with some scholars, I often claimed the importance to link the study of metaphysics to aspects related to gestures, to, let me say, to acted symbolism, and essentially to ritual. And indeed, the real title of my contribution is Ritual and Thought, the Metaphysics of Gesture. And I will be reading, not only to be quick, but because I think that if you miss this point, you, in a certain sense, miss half of your work, in my opinion. It is often claimed that to understand a metaphysical text, you do not need to have a practice of any ritual at all. This is certainly true if for metaphysics you mean, in a very broad sense, the clarification of the first principles of thinking, particularly if you do not admit any end point for your speculation, or if your aims is to obtain almost anything, ecce nunc, except for a salary from some institution. On the other hand, if metaphysics is the understanding, and now the Álvaro topic is really crucial, is the understanding of what makes reality what it is. And therefore, you are forced to assume that there exists a law of correspondence by virtue of which everything proceeds from metaphysical principles, which give it all its reality. Then the role of rituals becomes much more important. Indeed, rituals make easier the understanding of what can be obtained through the study of metaphysics. In a certain sense, performing a ritual is the analog of doing exercises on a theory that you have studied before. It is as swimming after learning swimming theory. I think that if one forgets such assumptions, then one's understanding of many ancient texts is greatly impoverished. In the following, I will try to dwell a little deeper into some fundamental notions about rituals, perhaps not so well known, but which are at the basis of certain attitudes that could have been at the center of the spiritual and intellectual life of many ancient philosophers. So I concentrate on this topic that is not so well known, that is metaphysics of gesture. According to many authors, the ritual is an acted symbol. In particular, the domain of rituals is a subdomain of the metaphysics of gesture. Hence, the metaphysics of gesture is at the foundation of any rituals. And let us admit that even mental activity as well as conscious abstention from it, falls into the category of gestures. The law of correspondence. The fundamental assumption behind the metaphysics of gesture is that the law of correspondence applies. Certainly, a large part of philosophy rejects it as a vain superstition for the use of manipulators of the noblest feelings of man. This does not concern us directly here because we are trying to help to extract from the pages of the ancient texts some of those harmonies that resonated in the original soul that produced them, and which, in the timeless time of their metaphysics, are beyond history. The law of correspondence says, 1, there are many levels of reality. 2, that in principle, we can concentrate the center of our consciousness in any of them. And 3rd, that by doing that, we can establish a direct connection with any of them, potentially being simultaneously in any of them. The law of correspondence implies that these different orders of reality are linked to each other, and that this linkage is a reflection of the principal unity in itself. Indeed, the unification of the self with itself is totally achieved when the transition from the individual to the person, the self, has taken place. And this is exactly the simultaneous understanding of all the degrees of being and non-being. Moreover, it is implicit in it that what is science on one rung of the ladder becomes symbol for our understanding of what it is on another rung of the same ladder. Symbol that enables us to see the analogical relations between the same metaphysical principles acting on different levels of the ladder. Indeed, the symbol makes also possible a relationship with the same entity, but seen or perceived into 2 distinct orders of reality. Finally, the ritual action, if well performed in a certain order of reality, can produce rhythmic waves that reverberate through the indefinite hierarchy of the multiple states of being. If you make this point your own, even for just a moment, only just this moment, so 10 minutes, you immediately feel how understanding a metaphysical discourse is not anymore a simple mind cleansing, but it allows for real leaps into the state of reality. And depending on where, you can concentrate the center of your consciousness. Reading metaphysical books with such a background is more like reading an instruction manual than delighting into the 1,000 nuances of a mind, as restless as it is vain. So I now put some typologies of rituals, and my idea is that in the FSA, people could have a kind of a scientific project to at least categorize a bit more this and to extract from texts indication in this direction. It's like to extract exercise from a big theory. No, once we have understood analysis, you really know analysis if you are able to do exercises. Rituals are of 2 types, mental one and physical ones. More precisely, we can divide the rites into 3 large categories. Here, my English is not so good. I didn't find a better expression. The sound one related to reeds and music, the graphic geometric one, and finally the gestural one. So very quickly, rituals related to sound. Here we can only point out that a purely sound-based ritual is composed of sounds which can very well correspond to ideograms or letters, and they can have associated their numerical value. And which is this numerical value? For example, the number that you can associate to sound waves. Hence, the sound symbol is in itself a rhythm that always repeats itself an indefinite number of times before vanishing for our senses. It is an harmonic wave that reflects a higher principle. Indeed, the shape of the sound wave reveals the essential principle, while resonance, timbre, intensity are other aspects that assume greater or lesser value depending on ritual circumstances. The sound symbols are close to the essence pole, and they are strongly related to the notion of mathematical progression. The graphic geometric rituals. The graphic geometric ones are close to the pole of a substance as their geometrical nature shows. To paraphrase Giordano Bruno, figure is, so to speak, not a quantity without quality, not a quality without quantity, but it is quality in quantity, not light, not color, not a trace of light and color, but a unity deriving from both in both. To activate this type of geometric symbols, we have to place ourselves at a certain distance from them because we have to trace or to draw them. Here, the duality principle is strongly at stake. In order to use them, we must presuppose the existence of a specific faculty, a kind of internal active imagination, which has nothing to do with individual fantasy, but it is capable of strong self-restraining. Moreover, this faculty is activated in order to be able to see what transcends our current modality of consciousness in its full reality. This spacing, this distancing, and this act of drawing outside of us is already a symbol in itself that implies the activation of an internal sense. Indeed, we can contemplate the immensity of the sky because we possess an internal image of it and not vice versa. This is essentially Giordano Bruno, clearly. Here we must use the principle of the inverse analogy of symbols, which in this case means that it is because we have within us attention towards the sky that we can contemplate its immensity and we can start our geometrization process. Finally, very quickly, the gestural rituals. The dynamic of sound rituals becomes transparent in pure gestural rituals. In these cases, we can speak of geometry in motion that actually, in some cases, becomes ritual dance. Wandering ritually in a consecrated temple is not engaging in a psychotic repetition of gestures that cloud the brain, but it is an opening of the part of the heart to perceive the subtle correspondences between the various planes of the simultaneous manifestation of the one. And finally, why beyond thinking and thinking? Well, in this kind of proposal, the nous can be seen as a conscious return to one's internal images. But the way out is twofold. One is the path of the mind that remember, adjust, systematize, rationalize the entire path according to a continuous geometrical process. Are we still so sure that this is not another ritual where our certainties find a way to fit into each other? The other way out is the conscious jump into the radical uncertainty, where all our past, present, and future mental and physical projections resonate to claim their importance, and simultaneously, the need to abandon them all, to open the way to the abyss, to silence, to light. So this is my idea to stimulate what? To stimulate at least a search that can be a scientific project. And we saw also in some of these images, you often have text and images. There are very good jobs, for example, now you know better than me on Giordano Bruno mathematical paper, images. Busi did the same for Kabbalah. Some friends of mine did the same on Sufi. But I think that to be concentrated on rituals, according to this point of view, a kind of exercise of done by people who had a strong metaphysical clue of what they were doing. Not they were crazy men doing some idiotic gestures, but very conscious in doing some acts, can help to understand even better the text that you so deeply study. Thank you.
For this extraordinarily beautiful talk. I'm tempted to translate it into Greek and presenting it as a pseudepigraphical text of Iamblichus of Proclus. Now, we will welcome questions, of course. Please.
Yes, I would like to stress the perfect complementarity between the two conferences, yours, Salvatore, and Marco, because in fact, Plato in Aeneid 6:6 is dealing with a stark contradiction on the nature of numbers, and with two aporetic assertions. The one is explicit. Plotinus said that Plato explained that we have two types of numbers. First, numbers which are conceived in the soul, when mankind observed the unfolding of night and day. And those are numbered numbers. But you have also not begotten number, but begetting numbers, which are numbering numbers. And this is the first contradiction, which is explicit. You have a second contradiction, which is perfectly Aristotelian. Svetla taught us that in physics 2, there is no motion in number. But in physics 4:14, on space and time, we have a number of motion. And this is the double contradiction. I think that, and here you enter the debate, that there is a very important and let's say a triggering assertion of Plotinus. He spoke of neo-Pythagorean numbers, monad, dyad, triad, as a methodological approach of this contradiction. So I think that we cannot draw a line between the neo-Pythagorean tradition, Plotinus, and Aristotle in the very reception of the problem. For example, when you take Ficino, he always read the commentary of De Cello with the famous consideration of the three numbers, 1, 2, 3, which is also the very beginning of Timaeus, Plotinus, and the Neo-Pythagorean tradition, Hierocles d'Alessandria, Hierocles, which is very, very important. So
you understand when I'm speaking of perfect complementarity on this very neo-Pythagorean approach, which is methodologically very, very important, I suppose.
Oh, okay. So thank you for your question. Very quickly, my perception is that this antinomic dimension of number or contradictory of I like antinomic as expression has to do with the fact that a number presents two faces. One face, I mean now Plotinus, one face oriented towards the one, and one face oriented towards being or intellect. And this actually, Plotinus perceives these two aspects as a real contraries or antinomical, so opposites. So then he does not fear, he does not perceive fear before a fruitful modality of antinomicity or contradiction, if we make this expression. So if we think to these characterizations of the intelligible words, 6, 7, 13, 14, the intelligible beings are the unconditional identity and unconditional alterity, both. So that, and you can interpret unconditional identity as unconditional relation to the one face of the number. That is the begetting dimension of the one of the number, the unconditionally begetting dimension of the number. And the second phase, the alterity, which is the orientation of intelligible words ad extra, because intelligible words is free from itself like the one, as giving place to this other dimension of number to which you have pointed. This is that is the dimension of number which has which is connected with more current mathematics. The second phase. So I think this could be a characterization explicating this antinomicity or contradiction in Plotinus. And no, I agree with your perception of the historical tradition, but maybe Marco can say something more detailed.
For your brilliant question. My advice is that this contradiction, this tension between is already in the early academy. Is already present in the early academy, in Plato, Speusipo, in late Plato. Prova.
Si sentiva.
In generale deve essere non rosso, no?
No, deve essere non rosso.
Non rosso,
Sì.
infatti.
Va bene?
Alza la voce.
Sì? Si sente? Prova. Ok. And my advice on this theme, on this difficult theme, is that this tension is embedded in the early academy mathematics conception, and so maybe also in the late dialogues of Plato, with an elementary model and a principal model of number. I think it's possible. We can find. We don't have the evidence of the sources, but it's possible that the same attention depends from the late Pythagoreans, Philolaus or Alcaitas. It's possible that we have only few fragments, but it's possible to read some fragments in this way. Thank you.
If I may add a little sentence. I think emphasizing the dimension of rhythmicity concerning number could help to understand more deeply the dynamics in this contradiction you pointed to, because you can interpret rhythmicity in especially in concerning the intelligible world as a tension between a radical tension between opposites, identity and alterity, both unconditional and infinite. And you have in rhythmicity the possibility, or through rhythmicity, the possibility of explaining the permanence of both opposites without that they annihilate each other. And on the other side, their unity, their paradoxical or dynamical or productive unity, which is characteristic of Plotinus. The intelligible world is eminently productive because it is antinomical. It's a world of radical continuity and radical discontinuity because it's present of an antinomical unity. And that's why it's an image of the one, freedom from oneself and from other being.
Thank you for these three excellent presentations. May I address a question to Francesco? As you described the rituals in the second part of your paper, did you intend to point out the likeness to, in the case of the sound waves, to mantra meditation, in the case of the diagrams to, say, Tibetan tankas, and in the case of the gestures to temple dance? Are you suggesting that these are the areas in which we should be looking that have become suppressed and forgotten in the Western traditions?
A bit, yes. Clearly, this could be the grand programme, no? But even less. I think that sometimes this part, possibly because it's technically very difficult, you know, but sometimes this part of literature, even the pictures, you know that, for example, there was, you know better than me that there was a book by Giordano Bruno that was translated. My Latin is completely, how say, finished, ended, but a sigillo sigillorum, something like that. See? And when they did the first edition, for example, they cut color. They considered the color. No, he made these draws using black and white, and not only some kind of diagrams. And they cut out. They say this is clearly something that we can do. In that case, could be that they were only a technique for his own art of memory. I don't claim any deep, I can say, intellectual activities. But it's important to see that they were considered so few, so small things that in a philological study of the text, you cut the color because this was something not important. I wanted to convey you, because you are the learned person, so I was speaking to that academician for the moment, that this test, these rituals, these draws, even in the presentation of Marco, you see you have the text and sometimes behind you have these are part that, at least in that context, I'm quite sure that they were much more important sometimes than the explanation. Sometimes speaking with the colleagues, not mathematicians, but philosophers, it seems that they use these kind of pictures to explain. Try for a moment, at least as an exercise, to do the vice versa, that the, the written part is an explanation. Try to put in this mood for a while and see what's happened. I'm not the, unfortunately, I'm not so good. I have not the learning to do by myself, but I'm sure that try to put in this opposite way and try to see what you can extract from this dialogue. Clearly, it's much harder because to have a philological proof of what? Written words are written brain, scripta manet. Means also this, while the picture, no? So, but this was the first aim of my speech. So is an appeal, try to be concentrated on this. Clearly, as a side effect, I think that if people doing this in this, and I'm connected to what I told you this morning, in this new era we are entering, no? We are in a new era. I feel like that. And if you don't try to use at our best what the tradition has given us, we risk a lot, in my opinion. And so this topic should be addressed also by the learned people with an attitude more respectful. And in this sense, what other traditions have maintained should be, in a certain sense, reconsider a bit in some way. I'm not claiming to do a new sect, the new Pythagorean sect to change the world, but at least at the level of understanding of learned people to be fully aware that this part are perhaps as important as the written text. No? This was the proposal.
Thank you, everyone, for really a great closing session on mathematics. And I will have a very kind of a pointed, precise question. I don't mean for this to grow into a big discussion, but I suspect it will. And we have dinner waiting for us. My question is to Marco, but actually it will relate very much to both Francesco's and Salvatore's presentation. In Iamblichus, in his hierarchy of numbers in De Communis Mathematicae, you outlined the series of noetos, noeros, autokinetos, and physikos, right? My question is about the autokinetos, because the autokinetos, this is the self-moving number. Actually, the three of you talked about the self-moving number in different ways, but you're talking, and this is the beauty of it, right? Yes. So I want to ask you, earlier you pointed the early academy, so Xenocrates, the soul is number moving in itself, but fast forwarding to Plotinus, who says that number thinks itself. He places the self-motion in intellect, not at soul. So my question is that the soul, or are the first two kinds of the intellect, autokinetos is the soul? And this is why I'm torn about, because the last chapter of the Aeneid, Aeneid 6-9, whatever is the last chapter of 6-9, this is the grand finale of the Aeneid, in which Plotinus describes how the dance of the individual soul unites with the one as a form of dance. And this dance is the ritual dance, which was the closing act of our presentation. So I just want to hear
exactly what I meant. No.
All right, keep going then. So who would like to take that?
We overlap on the same.
I guess it could be the third one.
Yes, it's the difficult point. It's underlined by O'Mara in his seminal book on and I am on the same line of Mara on this point. Yes, I rely also on your essay of 10 years ago, more or less, on Iamblichus and Plotinus, and it's difficult to reconstruct. On one side, the tiled, I think, ladder, ontological ladder of numbers in Iamblichus, because we have only few excerpts of our passage throughout the testimony of Psellus. And on the other end, it's difficult to reconstruct the early Accademia conception of number, in my opinion, because we can rely only on Aristotle's testimony. It's more reliable than the later sources. I think it's difficult to focus on a very detailed and clear reconstruction of this doctrine before Plotinus. At the moment, my opinion is, this is my opinion at the moment.
Thank you, Svetla. It is you're pointing to the autokineton. I find it very stimulating because so we all know in Plato the soul is autokinetos and so on and so on, but maybe had also Plato a numerical theory of the soul, but this is not explicit in his work. I think it is very interesting if we take seriously the unconditional productivity of the intelligible world. This self-referential movement becomes inner productivity because it is orientation, so eternal orientation towards the one, this inward dimension to which you point in your works, but since orientation to the one means orientation towards the freedom of the one, that is towards freedom from oneself, not only from all other beings, then orientation on the own self by the intellect implicates instantaneously unconditional generativity and numerality, not only in the immanence of the intelligible world, but also at the extra. And so I think what I want to say is we can decline this notion of autokinetos or autokineton, not in the sense of a unilateral self-referentiality, but as fundament of unconditional relationality. That is, autokinetos means rhythmical sphericity.
Yes, and going back to our quaternion definition of number and its aspects, Plotinus identifies all the entities of the intelligible realm with specific functions of number. When it comes to soul, he says, and soul is number, period. No attribute to it, no property. Why? Because actually soul has to do all the work of all the other aspects in a way in either world soul or individual soul. And at the end of the day, the individual dance of the soul in its unity with the one is the work that the soul is deciphering in the intelligible number. Going back to, that's not question, just a point, listening to you, I was really thinking of the whirling dervishes and the ritual of the union of the one as expressed as a truly as a contemplative practice. Is there anything more to say about that? Nothing really. It's all there.
No, I can try to finish in a kind of mathematical way. So in a certain sense, the potentiation, a kind of, I mean, not going perhaps too high, but if you think to the inverse of a number, you have something that moves towards infinity, 1, 2, 3, and go on. Something that goes to 0, 1/2, 1/4, 1/3, no? And in the middle, what stays is 1. So that is the image that in a sense of a rhythm, no? You can see numerically. So in a certain sense, I like fictitious things that are something like a phantasma. But if you, in a certain sense, try to go inside the text, I think that this kind of expansion fully, I mean, if you have simultaneously this double movement, is something that can help to understand what is behind. That is the most that I can say tonight. No, they are too different, to infinity, to 0, but there is something that doesn't move, it's 1. Thanks. Questions?
Okay. You are. I remind you that you are all kindly invited to remain for dinner. Also, those who are at Frascati's hotels, and after dinner, it will be a car service so that you can go straight to the city center, to the town center. Dinner will be at 9 o'clock, so you have time to 9 o'clock, so you have time to enjoy the garden and the twilight. And let us thanks again our speakers.